Thank you for downloading the book from the free electronic library royallib.com, https://royallib.com. All books by the author, https://royallib.com/author/Mileshkin_Andrew.html. The same book in other formats, https://royallib.com/book/Mileshkin_Andrew/autogrish.html. Enjoy reading. Alexander Voronkov, Andrew Mileshkin, Helena Yavorskaya. Prologue. 1941, X04. Eagle. My beloved Martha. Finally managed to carve out a minute to start writing a letter to you. This morning I received from you 4 bags of sweets and a warm sweater for my birthday. It does not matter that it has already passed, mail from the fatherland is now 4 to 5 weeks. Now I am in a city with a funny name, Orgel, located not far from the Bolshevik capital of Moscow. They say that in human, German, it means eagle. It is a pity that Willy and his Luftwaffe cameraman are not next to me, they would have liked such a pun. Sometimes I think that this damned country is inhabited only by fanatics. The Russians defend themselves so fiercely, as if they still do not understand that their cause is lost. Yesterday, after several days of forced march, we approached the outskirts of this city, breaking through the scattered but fierce resistance of small groups of Bolsheviks. Fortunately, my car is designed to transport fuel, so I never drive at the head of the columns, and even more so in the forward detachment. So don't worry about my health, my love. Nothing bad can happen to me. But our tank guys were not lucky yesterday. Crazy Russians not far from the city, from the edge of the forest, suddenly opened fire on the forward detachment. The Stalinist fanatics managed to destroy 2 of our panzerwagons and smash a truck with soldiers from their only anti-aircraft gun. Imagine, these wooden heads did not even have infantry cover, and therefore our guys were able to quickly suppress the resistance. Nevertheless, several comrades died, and even more were injured. Yes, and our Arbeitrot will have to tinker with the repair of panzerwagens. And we were forced to collect the bodies of the dead grenadiers and take them to the burial place, while the body of my truck was soiled. But on the other hand, I became the owner of a beautiful silver watch, though a little old-fashioned and with incomprehensible engraving in barbaric Russian letters on the cover. I'm still thinking about what is more profitable, to keep them or sell them. Yes, and our Arbeitrot will have to tinker with the repair of panzerwagens. And we were forced to collect the bodies of the dead grenadiers and take them to the burial place, while the body of my truck was soiled. But on the other hand, I became the owner of a beautiful silver watch, though a little old-fashioned and with incomprehensible engraving in barbaric Russian letters on the cover. I'm still thinking about what is more profitable, to keep them or sell them. Yes, and our Arbeitrot will have to tinker with the repair of panzerwagens. And we were forced to collect the bodies of the dead grenadiers and take them to the burial place, while the body of my truck was soiled. But on the other hand, I became the owner of a beautiful silver watch, though a little old-fashioned and with incomprehensible engraving in barbaric Russian letters on the cover. I'm still thinking about what is more profitable, to keep them or sell them. There were also several skirmishes on the outskirts and on the city streets, but they cannot be compared with what we had to endure in Smolensk. We dined already in Orel. Wait. A company was placed in houses on the outskirts of the city, closer to the fuel depots captured from the Russians. Our Hauptmann was delighted to the point of madness at this circumstance and immediately posted guards there. So I didn't manage to get enough sleep last night. As a vigilant post, I paced in the nasty rain with weapons at the ready, now and then slipping in the Russian mud. There is nothing to be done. With these Bolsheviks you need to keep your eyes and ears wide open. The damn dog pigs do not appreciate our efforts to free them from the Jewish commissar power. When yesterday the guys from the 1st platoon were placed on vacation in one of the houses, they found a wounded Bolshevik from the NKVD hiding. I had to shoot him, along with both mistresses of the house, as a warning to other Russians. I can't help thinking without sadness that by some absurd accident a dog was wounded, a lovely little white creature, so much like your Lily. A Hauptmann, as it turned out, once attended 2 semesters at the Faculty of Medicine in Tübingen, and the guys dragged the poor animal to him. Despite his high position, the commander never forgets his folk roots and, of course, did not refuse help. I had to assist in the operation. Do you remember how great I was at providing first aid in the Hitler Youth Camp? The broken paw was operated on with the simplest methods available to us and placed in Lubox. Now the dog, which, at the suggestion of Hauptmann, was named Blondie, in honor of the Führer's faithful companion, has become the general favorite of the guys from the first platoon. And the weather was very bad, mud, rain, dampness all around. The cold has come, which in Pomerania we have only in January, and now it is only the beginning of October. How many degrees will it be here in winter? The Russians say that last year the frost reached 50 degrees, and the snow cover, up to 2 meters. God forbid we delay the capture of Moscow until the snow falls. The good news is that in any case we will celebrate Christmas already in Moscow. There, in the winter apartments of the Russian capital, we will be able to endure the hardships of the accursed Bolshevik winter painlessly enough to start a victorious offensive again in the spring. Dear Martha. Shortly after receiving this letter, expect a package from me. Knowing that your choice of products on the cards is somewhat limited, oh, yes, today the nation is giving up some household amenities, but tomorrow the whole world will belong to us. I am sending you a jar of natural Russian honey, which I got by chance, 2 cans of can crab and coat fabric. This morning I managed to get it in a small shop in the next street. Alas, it didn't work out to get hold of something more substantial. The damned infantrymen from the forward units had been there before, and everything that they couldn't carry in their satchels tried to break, soil and tear, in a word, completely ruin it. Don't be sad, it's okay, ahead of us are Tula and Moscow, where you can pick up any goods in the store without paying a penny. This is the right of the winner. Dear Martha. I would be glad to write you much more, but I can't keep up. It's time to get ready for the flight. Our Pennsylvanians drove off towards the city with the unpronounceable, barbaric name Sensk, and your Kurt will once again have to deliver fuel for their insatiable engines. I hug and kiss you 1,000 times. Loving you, Kurt Balthazar. Chapter 1. Autumn 1941. A frontline city, leader said slowly and clearly, tasting the words. Bitter slightly, and only. Well, I can't believe that the Eagle is frontline, I can't believe it, and that's it. The same streets, the same houses, people ride the tram on their own business, and there are no more military men than usual. Even the boys, the same age as Vaska's elder nephew, are busy with the usual thing. They put nails on the rails in front of the approaching red car, and then they collect the flattened pieces of metal. Curious, what is he to them? For game? Or what kind of crafts do they make? I'll have to ask Vasyatka. And Pervomaysky Square is exactly the same as on the day of her first meeting with Mitya. September 16, 38. Exactly 3 years and 3 days have passed. And again it breaks through the faded greenery, not at all boring, such a sunny yellowness. Sparrows bathe in dust, celebrate Indian summer. And Mitya is not in the city. And there is no Pavel Varka. And the windows of the houses are sealed with paper strips crosswise. And the faces of passers-by seem to be just concentrated, but at home, in Guryevsky Lane, that is, in Klebny, just the old name is more familiar. Everything is the same as it was during my mother's life, geraniums on the windowsills, starched bedspreads on the beds, and embroidered tablecloth. Symbols of petty bourgeois well-being. Mitya chided his sister-in-law without malice. But seriously, Varka is like a mother, an extraordinary hostess. 10 minutes and dinner is on the table. Not the same, of course, as she regaled before the war. But still there are potatoes, and pickles, and even pies, though not with meat, but with finely chopped onions. For Lida, who was starving on the road, it was a sumptuous feast. I baked it on the road, Varya said, as if casually. Who's on the road? Us. Only now Lida's gaze caught on a shapeless trunk in the corner. The sleeve of a child's knitted blouse hung surprisingly sloppy from the trunk. Pitiful and creepy. Both were silent, one did not want to hear, the other did not want to speak. Walkers calmly, as if nothing had happened, counted the minutes. It was nearing midnight. Lidus, I sent a letter, but it, you see, didn't catch you. I wrote that you should immediately go to Aunt Dacia. The youngest pushed the plate away. Either she was finally satisfied, or a piece was across her throat, she herself could not make out. She spoke with effort. I got it. But I thought you'd change your mind. Mom always said that houses and walls help. And she added quietly, so that the shameful uncertainty was not so heard. Very, why are you leaving? Oriel is the center of the military district, there should be some troops here, right? Won't give up. Something. Varya shook her head in time with the movement of the pendulum. Frighteningly mechanical movement. Come with us to Kamenka, Huh? What is it, to run, or what? Lida felt both annoyed and embarrassed. She turned to the window, pulled the heavy black curtain. Shut it, shut it. The elder sister impulsively and fussily took her hand away. You can't, blackout. She changed her spirit. But the fright did not leave her eyes. Lida saw. The station is being bombed, and it falls to us. There were 3 air raid alerts today, and the 3rd day. Do you remember the Paralygians? Like half of the people from the depot, some to the front, some to evacuate with their families, so Porfirich leaned on a piece of iron as a watchman. Well, Varya sighed deeply, with a sob. His leg was blown off in the bombing. It's still summer. They didn't make it to the first aid station. And the Ivanikovs were bombed. Marussia and her children are now with their grandmother in the village. Again they sat in silence. The ticking of the clock in the silence filled Lida with fear, but for some reason speaking was even more terrible. She shuddered when Varya asked in an undertone. Is Mitya writing? Writes. Just before I leave, here. And not a word from Pashka since the 10th of August. Varya got up, began to collect the dishes, shook her head when she saw that Lida was getting up. They say, I'll manage it myself. Save my children. I promised. And, after a pause. What are you going to do? I wanted to ask you, the youngest admitted. Who needs librarians now? Yes, Varya very carefully, silently put the plate on the plate. Only here you are and the nurses. You think I can't do it? You'll figure it out. What's there? The elder sighed and finished with pressure. If something happens, well, something happens, the hospital will be taken out first. I think so. I thought. I'll go. How do you remember how to get to your aunt? I'll get it, Linda nodded. And mentally repeated, if anything. Farewell to relatives turned out to be long, fussy and stupid. Varya repeated 3 times. A jar of kerosene behind the sideboard. Don't mix it up. Pashka has something in the other, and it seemed that she forgot what was said before she had time to finish. She also ordered to better cover the potatoes. The mice have completely lost their fear, and for some reason she added, as the war began, so did. Then she suddenly decided that Manechka would certainly freeze on the way, and began to look for a downy shawl, fluffing up both the bag and one of the 2 bundles. For no reason, Manechka burst into tears, and everyone comforted her for a long time, and again packed her things, and for some reason it didn't work out as well as before. Somehow managed. Varya sat down wearily, for some reason, on a bundle, and not on a stool, and glanced at the wall clock. If anything, hide Mom's clocks in the shed, just wrap it up better so that they don't get spoiled, she said and sobbed. Linda nodded silently. What is there to say? As long as there was a family, so many of these clocks were. And where is Vaska? Varya caught on. They looked around the rooms, looked out into the yard. Manechka, delighted at the unexpected game of hide and seek, ran out into the street. Came back shining. Vasyatka went to the Lavrishchev's yard. I saw it. We hurried to the neighbors. Vaska tried to sneak away, but Grandma Lavrishcheva did not doze. She slapped him on the back of the head. Well, she weighed her grandson Mishka for warning. Well, why are you running around? It's time for us a long time, Varya began to utter to her son to hide awkwardness, from her, from the children herself, except with a wet towel, when they climbed arm in the kitchen. It's you who runs, but I don't want to, the boy snapped. She herself told me that Oral would not be handed over, and now what? Varya, blushing and looking back at her grandmother, began to make excuses. They would only help Aunt Dusya with the housework. She was already old. It was difficult for her to do everything alone, and then they would return. Vasyatka would not even have time to fall behind the class. Grandmother agreed and furtively chuckled either at Varya's treatment of the jerk, or at her inept lies. Finally they returned home for things, kissed each other, sat down on the path, moved in a group to the gate, and, "We forgot Lida!" cried Manechka desperately and, almost knocking her aunt off her feet, rushed back. Lida did not immediately realize that this was not about her, about the doll. Yes, and when I realized it, my heart was not relieved. She was silent. And Varya was silent, although another time she would definitely not fail to complain about bad omens. Lida always loved silence and was very surprised that someone got tired of it. The silence of the reading room is solid, friendly to clever thoughts. Homemade, light and warm, like a favorite blanket. The silence of the autumn city is calm, comfortable. The silence of this autumn was completely different, sentry, unreliable, deafened by the bombings and stupefied by heavy expectations. The one at home is also constantly at the same time with fatigue, from which she did not allow to rest. Varia's sighs and the mournful exclamation of Mileshkin, "Lida has been forgotten," seemed to be in her. She pushed her away, drove her out of the house. The silence of the hospital, crippled, suppressing a scream, tightly tied with bandages. Nevertheless, Lida adapted to take a nap between shifts in the nurse's room. It was not approved, but no one was in a hurry to ban it. She did not try to convince herself that there was some special meaning in her presence here. The hospital lacked qualified medical staff, to say nothing of civilian nurses. It was just easier for her herself, no extra thoughts, because here it was impossible. Well, that is, thoughts, everyone has them, only they rarely turn into words. Unless one of the wounded asks, "Sister, what is heard in the city?" "Everything is still the same," Lida answered, and did not know what to add. She had never been talkative before. Mitya used to joke, "I was lucky to find a rare rarity, a quiet woman." And the current city news, those that were both visible and heard, there was no need to tell, everyone knew them anyway. Every day this news broke in with a roar and settled like smoking ruins on Vyganaya, on Medvedevskaya, on Pushkinskaya, on Korsky. And others, from those that were passed from mouth to mouth, simply did not want to repeat. I didn't even want to believe in them. Today, Nadia Minikova, a brisk dark-haired nurse, told a secret. The commander of the Tyran district with his staff left the city last evening. To the east. Maybe in Tsensk, but who knows there. I didn't want to believe. But how, one wonders, not to believe if Nadia's groom is a Chekist? No, it's better to limit yourself to the meaningful and meaningless. Everything is the same. And they'll let everyone decide for himself whether it is for good or for worse. Sociable, and generally talkative, Nadia got out in her own way, parted briskly. Well, the fact that my little sister, Tanka, uncovered her braid to twist the curls, like the neighboring Valka, and Aunt Nura lost her one-eyed cat, it's of no interest to you, and you already heard the report. Stubborn battles on everything front, in the western direction. Now our planes have destroyed a bunch of German equipment and a company of infantry to boot. Personally, I like such news. Akshen even. Lida was desperately jealous of her. There are people who you can never tell that they are alarmed, or saddened, or... And today she rushed to the sisters at all, animated, blurted out right from the threshold. "Girls, after the shift, everything is with me." And, making mysterious eyes, she sang in an operetta voice, "Her banquet is planned." Linda was surprised. She was even a little curious. No, she wasn't going anywhere, of course, but Nadia was not one of those from whom you can easily dissuade. So what if Lida has been working in the hospital for a week without a year? She, Nadia, is not the personnel department to be interested in this. Tired? Who doesn't get tired? You might think that she, Nadia, does not get tired, or, there, Tonka. And in the end she gave out the most weighty argument. My Vanko asked for home for half a day. You understand, he's in the barracks, we haven't seen each other for a month. You say it's not a holiday? According to our times, it is even a holiday. And it's like this with us, if it's a holiday, then the house is full of people. This is how we will walk the wedding, everyone will hear, from the railway station to Brick. Aunt Zina, Vanka's mother, is probably already baking pies with might and main. So don't think about it, come on. They were a very beautiful couple, dark-haired Nadia and her Vanya, who looked like a prince from a fairy tale. True, Nadia grumbled that he should not have put on his civilian clothes when the guests arrived. When he was in uniform, it was more pleasant to look at him. And he feigned a frown in response and laughed it off. If you love your uniform so much, why didn't you meet with that flight cadet? The flyers, of course, have more glamour than ours. Vanya had a whole dozen guests, but there was only one man among them, more precisely, a young guy in heavy, professorial glasses. So the topic of conversation was set by Nadia, who took the opportunity to show off in a bright blue crepe de chine dress. Well, fellow citizens, how do you like my new thing? The guests began to lively discuss fabrics, styles, share their dreams, who would like to sew what kind of dress. Lida sighed and smiled, even a raspberry liqueur wouldn't drag her into such a conversation. But the same liqueur loosened the tongue of the shy kid in glasses, Jorah, and suddenly it turned out that both he and Lida were simply eager to talk about Shakespeare's sonnets. She was warm and cheerful. And it seemed that everything and everyone is now good and just wonderful, and there are no other topics for conversation, except for the most pleasant ones. Lida suddenly imagined that Varya and Pashka were sitting at the head of the table, as if at a wedding. And Mitya. Mitya is here too, he just went out into the yard to smoke and will be back any minute. Linda remembered. And I felt, they are all trying to fence themselves off from what will happen anyway. So, as if beautiful, as before the war, clothes can save a person, and carefree chatter can dispel an eerie silence, this silence from bombing to bombing. And Aunt Zena, a white-haired old woman with a surprisingly sonorous, young voice, suddenly dropped, either apologizing or complaining. So it turns out, a table is poor now. Whether it's before the war. Let's get a gramophone, shall we? As if not hearing her, Nadia exclaimed with exaggerated enthusiasm. But in her voice Lida could feel the senile rattling. And in the dance she moved somehow unevenly, now she shuffles her feet like an old woman, now she starts, as if coming to her senses, to stomp fractionally out of time with the music. And when the melody stumbled and limped, Nadia did not even remove the needle, she pulled it off hastily, sharply, and sat down in her place, nodding to Vanya that it was time to fill the glasses. And then she sang, no, she spoke softly and sternly. An order was given, to him, to the west. She's on the other side. Komsomol members left. To the civil war. They left, parted. Leaving the quiet. Are you something to me, dear? Wish goodbye. One of the girls, Lida did not have time to figure out who it was, began to quietly sing along, but they shushed her. And Nadia continued in an even voice. And the mother replied. I wish with all my heart. If death, then, instantaneous. If the wounds are small. And Lida suddenly thought that they were praying with such a voice. Only Aunt Zena saw off the guests in the hallway. Lida heard Nadia sobbing in the kitchen at the top of her voice and asking. Well, you tell me, everything is bad, right? Since no one really says anything, it means that everything is very, very bad. No, what's wrong? Vanya repeated consolingly. Those who are supposed to know, they know when it is needed, and they will tell you. In the meantime, well, you see, we are in the city and are not going anywhere from here. Well, what are you crying about then, silly? Linda heard. And this time I didn't believe it. Chapter 2. October 3, 1941, Opchuha Station area. During his school years, Vanka liked to read about the war. And not some novels there, where the battle fits on one page, but all sorts of balls and chatter, for a good 50, but serious books, with maps, with diagrams indicating the direction of the blow. And Uncle Petya, his mother's elder brother, used to tell about the war with the German. He didn't bait stories for the kids, but he laid down the words slowly and weightily, as if he were paving the road. And he always concluded. War is not your clashes on sticks that you pulled out of the wattle fence at Granny Manny's. War is like working in a hot shop. It is difficult, it takes strength, and anything can happen. And heroism. Well, Duck did the job, well, that is, he fulfilled the order, a hero. That's why Vanka imagined that in war everything is always clear, there are commanders who know exactly what needs to be done, there is an order, weapons are in their hands, the enemy is ahead. It was thought in childhood, it seemed until yesterday evening and believed when they, 700 Chekists and border guards, called the NKVD militia, received, in addition to their rifles, a meager amount of grenades and a fair amount of Molotov cocktails and advanced on lorries to Kromi. Destroy the German landing, as they were told. At first, Vanka tried to imagine how everything would happen. However, for some reason, only shots from a film about Chapai came to mind. And then there were no thoughts at all. Vanka, it seems, even dozed off, feeling through his sleep both the shaky swaying of the truck, and his own chills, either from excitement, or from the night cold. He did not even have time to come to his senses, as, pushed out of the car by someone's hand, he was already lying in a ditch, and from all sides and as if even from the sky crackling and rumbled. And he also shot, and if it were in the white light, like a pretty penny, otherwise it was in the impenetrable darkness of the night, sickeningly stinking of metal and gasoline. And when everything calmed down, I realized, people are not lying at all about the deafening silence. But the voices sounded muffled, like from a barrel. And what they are talking about, you will not immediately understand. But even so it is clear, whatever it is, it does not look like a landing. Gone home, yes, only, you need to understand, they set off to look for another road, a bypass. And now what? No one was in a hurry to clarify. Vovka, the border guard, who always got to know everything faster than anyone else, brought the news. The commander and the commissar had moved somewhere in the Emka. By the way, it turns out where you left off, stop there. In the dark and under a light rain, there are no raincoats, there is water in the flasks, not to say that there is an abundance, and water from above, not to say that it is in short supply. And the cops on the side of the road is another shelter. And what to do? They settled in, as best they could. Vovka the border guard even got a piece of tarpaulin from somewhere, organized a kind of tent for 4, even lit a fire. You can live. That's how I reason, men, Vovka spoke, twisting the goat's leg with his chilled, unruly fingers. We flew into the vanguard of the hands. Landing, you ask? Why, their infantry on tank armor is not a landing force? Only now those tanks are no less than to hell. And if they didn't take us for someone else, they would immediately write out a ticket to the next world for us. Consider cool. Cool, you say? Grumbled Ilyuka hoarsely, otherwise known as Paravos, a silent guy who had recently asked for them from the paramilitary guard of the Peace of Iron. Well then, tell me, smart guy, where did they go? What's there to think about? The border guard frowned. It's not like a smart guy, it's clear to the last fool that they are on the road to Oriol. Wow. The steam locomotive boomed instructively. This is it, oh luck. Just not the fact that they will come today, continued Vovka. The devil knows where they will drill into the local nubbers and how long they will look for the road later. And there they will be met on the outskirts, by Newbury? The gypsy guy, nicknamed Moldavian, vividly asked, although his last name was Shevchenko and shortly before the war he came to Oriol from somewhere in the south of Ukraine. And what? In our opinion, it's like, I'm interested. How do I know how it is in your opinion? Vovka spluttered. And then it dawned on him, why don't they say that? We don't talk like that. And here it is, no. By Nubba, off-road, that is. They went around the highway, right? And besides the terrain that they have on the maps, there is also the terrain itself, do you get the idea? The road to Krivtsovo and Shumakovo is normal, Ilyuka interjected again. And then, it seems to me, they will trample along the piece of iron. I smoked for half a minute and finished. So, today, and mother? And Nadyushka? Vanka began to shiver again, and he mentally scolded himself, only now it wasn't enough to loosen up. And for some reason, it became embarrassing that he was the first to remember his own people when this was happening. Although, for sure, both Ilyuka and the Moldavian thought about their families at that moment. Vovka is easier, he is lonely. What kind of war is this? Where the enemy is, it is not clear how much of that enemy, too, no one is in a hurry to command. Guys, stop smoking, let's move out. Where? Vanka asked confused. For some reason, Ilyuka. To Kudakina Mountain, steam engine grinned with unexpected anger. Home, where else? They loaded quickly, but it seemed, terribly slowly. Vovka was the last to jump into the back and immediately stunned. Here's to you and Nubrium. Do you know where the Huns are? We spent the night in Nuba. And from that Nubba to Oral 20 kilometers. So consider at what time they will come to visit in the morning chill. How do you know? Vanka jumped up. Well, the commander and the commissar have just come from there. Forced out. Are they reporting to you? Why? I'm a scout. You are a yap, not a scout. Vanka almost expressed himself in the hearts. Okay, I bit my tongue just in time. What is Vovka to blame for? Yes, and the commander and the commissar, if you think about it, rushed into the night not a fool. Their commander is not just anyone, a major of the NKVD border troops, a personnel officer. Vovka knows everything with us, drawled Paravos, but understands little. After such guests you will not collect bones. Don't panic. The border guard scoffed. What kind of panic? Ilyuka sighed as if he was being forced to explain something very simple. An iron fool will trample on you, in which it's good for 1,000 poods, and what do you have against her? You know as well as I do. And you stand against her. And stand. Because I feel we will have no other fate. October 3, 1941, southwestern outskirts of Oral. Previously, it seemed to Vanka that fate was just an invention, with which in the old days unscrupulous fortune-tellers fooled obscure superstitious people. And in general, he did not take it into his head. Whether business, the motherland. So I thought about her, and read, and wrote in a school essay. Motherland is a huge country from edge to edge, Moscow with Red Square, Leningrad with Smolny and Aurora. But Nadyushka, then not yet a bride, just a classmate, wrote in a completely different way. It turned out that the house on the railway station, mother, and sister, and school, and girlfriends, and grandmother's village, and the guys there, motherland. Vanka was surprised. They are strange people after all, girls. And they have strange dreams. Well, what kind of dream is this? I will become, they say, a nurse. I will help people. As if doctors don't help people. No, dream, so dream. Maybe even a feat the kind they write about in the papers. Vanka dreamed. Silently, this vermin will laugh after all. Even then she didn't go into her pocket for a word, Nadyushka. And the motherland, it turns out, is the earth. And now I think not about the one that is from edge to edge, but about that reddish-grey, viscous that sticks to the shovel, clogs in the mouth, in the ears, and falls in lumps down the collar. The shovel is already heavy. And the ground is soft. Lie down, lie down. Cold. It's good that it's cold. Cool down, add vigor. Yes, but this land is a frontier. In an hour, she will protect those who will protect her. The water in the flask smells like earth. And Vanka smelled of earth. And the smoke of shag has a smell that comes from the earth warmed by the sun. A grey dawn is spreading on the ground. And the sky is also earthy. For a moment, Vanka began to feel that he was an ant building his own dwelling in a huge, reliable dugout. Which means nothing bad will happen. None of them. Nothing bad. And even when the earth shot up into the sky, and the sky began to crumble to the ground, it was not scary. There was something else, incomprehensible, for which there probably is no name, but not fear. Earth something, it covers. Until that song are crossed, we will live. Vovka the border guard yelled into Vanka's ear in a breaking, cheerful voice. Only they'll find a place to cross. It is understandable. Tson is a small river, Vanka, I remember, swam across as a 10-year-old boy. There and back again. 3 times before falling on the bank, exposing the sides to the sun. And in depth here, in some places, an adult is up to the top of his head, and in others, even knee-deep. However, there is no, but a water barrier. Behind which, 700 angry, sleepy Russians. 3 light tanks and a handful of infantry are unlikely to trample on the rampage, snap back and go home with nothing. But who said that the Gansyaks sent a single reconnaissance group? Wow, they are moving again. One of the 3 slowly, as if groping, moved along the bank, crushing the liquid bush. Another poked his head into the water, ran into a plop in 50 rifle volleys, and backed away. And it became quiet again. And restless. They'll go around, Ilyuka said quietly, but for some reason very clearly, as if overhearing Vanka's thoughts. And jerked his head to the left. For lovers of all sorts of interesting names, listen, Moldavian, for you, on the other side of the village, it's called Gat. They won't ford the river, they'll move through the Gat, yeah. And then Vanka got through. Not to trembling, to numbness. This was once in childhood, when he spent the night alone in an evicted house on a dare. Anything could happen, starting with the fact that the watchman who missed him suddenly decides to be vigilant, and ending with the fact that the dilapidated ceilings between the floors would collapse. But it was scary from the fact that on the right and on the left there were empty dark rooms. Not even because no one will come to the rescue, but simply, what happens, they are, defense? Only they, and that's it? Nobody near Gadi, that's for sure. And behind, in advance dug trenches on the outskirts? What, is it empty too? It turns out that they gave the German a city? The next moment there was no time to think. Through the deafness that did not want to retreat, Nadyushka's quiet, breaking voice broke through. If death, then, instantaneous. If the wounds are small. So, after all, there is it, fate, if you can smell it from afar. But there was no fight. Really, everything? Struggling to open his eyes, Vanka called out. Vovka. Wow, how is it? For some reason, the Moldavian responded. We'll leave. Ilyuka says he knows where to get hold of a cart. And if he says soon already, Vanka was waiting. What is it to him? It is difficult for them now. Here is a Moldavian, Ilyuka, Vovka, but where is Vovka? You have to call and ask. After. Now let them do their thing. And all he has to do is lie down and wait, pushing out the pain with each exhalation, so that it doesn't cover again when the earth is warm and smells of bread and smoke, like from a fire, and it struck again and trembled. The earth also breathes, pushes out pain. Live. A second later, it fled up under the feet of Hans, or Kurt, or Friedrich, and a stupefying smell of burning and decay. Vanka was brought back to consciousness by a low rumble, audible even through the roar and crackle. The sky, white, very white, blinded, and was immediately covered with something dark. Large planes were flying towards the city. 8 twin-engine PS-84s, the product of American technical genius and Russian working skills, one after another, without going into a circle over the airfield, hurriedly went to land. A little to the side and above, almost catching the rain-soaked clouds with their tails, tumbled, flaring with the evil lights of cannons and machine guns, 2 triples of Hawks against a dozen masses. However, no, not a dozen, 1 Mi-109F, dragging a smoky plume behind it, hurriedly hobbled to the southwest, towards Dmitrovsk. The pilot of the second was dragged away by a gusty wind along with a parachute towards a sparse grove. Here the wheels of the first Ersatz-Douglas synchronously hit the runway, spun, obeying the eternal law of inertia, and the plane quickly rolled forward for its dimensions, turning the propellers of the non-switched motors in order to clear the track as soon as possible for the Journeyman comrade flying into the wake. The winged car had not yet had time to stop completely, when a vaulted door in its side burst open with a jerk and Red Army soldiers and commanders began to jump out onto the gravel. Obeying jerky commands, they, barely having time to stretch their legs numb from hours of sitting, grouped into squads, platoons and hurriedly advanced towards the railway embankment. For steel shafts, PTR 39 were dragged on their shoulders in pairs, nervously looking back, where dozens of Red Star TB3s were already flying up to the airfield. The first platoon of paratroopers was already climbing the embankment when sharp pops of cannon shots were heard from the crossing. The advanced tank platoon of the Germans, together with attached panzer grenadiers, opened fire on the airfield of the airfield. When for the first time in your life you realize that the chirping sounds next to you are made not by harmless goldfinches sparrows, but by very real bullets and fragments of shells, you will involuntarily bend down in surprise, pulling your head in and envying the turtle with its shell, or even throw yourself on the ground with a swing. She, the nurse and intercessor, will shelter from the enemy's flying iron. Obeying the commands, the landing paratroopers began to disperse across the field, and the empty planes began to take off one by one. A merry golden-haired political instructor, moving among jumpsuits and field uniforms with diagonal dark blue riding breeches the width of the Black Sea and an aviation band of a cap, rushed to an irrigation ditch not far from the road, dragging the nearest platoon with him. Trained by the mileage of pre-war force marches, paratroopers. Led by the most reckless, and perhaps the most unreasonable commander, the PZ, KPFW-2 poked his head to the right, simultaneously turning the turret to comb the ditch with flanking fire, getting too close to it. Immediately, someone's hand shot up above the ground and, tumbling in the air, a kilogram carcass of a grenade flew into the tank. An explosion on the frontal sheet stunned the driver, forcing him to release the clutch levers, just as the Teuton lost the reins of a warhorse when he was hit with a mace on a bucket helmet. The second grenade, not having flown, threw up the ground a meter from the side, but the third, RPG-40, fell exactly, breaking the steel caterpillar and damaging the drive roller. The Panzerman, who soon leaned out, caught several bullets at once and settled inside the steel coffin. The comrades of the wrecked tank, apparently, decided not to take unnecessary risks and, stopping at a respectful distance, began methodical shelling. However, their laughter did not last long. As soon as the artillery paratroopers rolled out an anti-tank gun from the first TB-3 that landed, the Germans lost the opportunity to behave outrageously with impunity. And when there were 345s, 2 more German cars soon began to smoke. Sensibly judging, they say, this is not a royal business, to smoke your ass. The fascist commander gave the order to withdraw. Meanwhile, the heavy bombers kept descending from the grey sky onto the grey concrete, rolled along it like winged skids, and, spitting people, boxes and guns out of their Journeyman Moors, again heavily taxed to take off. Surprisingly, none of these air giants burned, did not lie at the end of the runway with a pile of crumpled metal. Apparently, Ilya the Prophet, not recognized by the Soviet government, nevertheless decided to cover the aviators with his cloak from flying shells and saved them from a direct hit. As for the holes in the planes and fuselages, well, extra lighting has never hurt anyone. As soon as the paratroopers unloaded the last, sixth gun, a breathless messenger came running with an order to occupy a pre-prepared line of defense on the edge of the field on the other side of the railway embankment, which closed the airfield itself and the city outskirts much further from it from the eyes of the enemy. Well, how did Suvorov say about hard to learn? During the service, the personnel paratroopers of the Red Army did not have very many exercises, but, nevertheless, some skills had already been worked out, including the ability to roll a square and carry around one, so the batteries had to cope with the task of rolling the entrusted material part. Do not grieve, do not be sad, everything will be fine. Ride quickly, everything will be forgotten. I fell out of love, well, so what? It became clear to her that she was not good. I will love you, my irises. Captain Denis Frantsuzov, resting his feet on a branch, and with his shoulder blades on a birch trunk, either taking a careful look at the area in front of him, or referring to a slide rule, compiled a fire card. In front of my eyes, on both sides, slowly silvered rivers, whose banks were sparsely overgrown with shrubs with sparse trees. In the interfluve, slightly rising towards the center, lay an unplowed field, stretching almost from the station left behind, and to tell the truth, the Steel Horsehouse station, and to a forest darkening in the distance, hiding some village from sight. From there, a German attack was expected. At the near edge of the field, along the bushes, the paratroopers had already occupied the trenches prepared by someone in advance, and only at the positions of the anti-tankers shovels flashed, the soldiers hastily equipped shelters and prepared shell ditches. The left flank was covered by local guys with buttonholes of the NKVD troops, an escort battalion that guarded the famous Orlovsky Central until the German breakthrough of the front. Below, under a tree, two telephone operators were hurriedly digging a trench. The figure of a third, loaded with coils of wire, flickered in the distance between the bushes. In 5 to 8 minutes the communication line to the second firing platoon would be extended. From the location of the first platoon and from the point of ammunition, they have already called back about the execution. What could not but rejoice? From the location of the first platoon and from the point of ammunition, they have already called back about the execution. What could not but rejoice? From the location of the first platoon and from the point of ammunition, they have already called back about the execution. What could not but rejoice? Well, fly faster, horses, drive away melancholy. We will find ourselves another, a beautiful wife, as you used to come to her, to my dear. Snuggle, kiss, caress, as it happened with her heart calmly. We spent the evening with her, falcons, and now I'm flying with you, oh, eagles. Passing time with you, wretched ones. It looks like I'm destined to. Before my eyes, approximately where a signalman's overalls flashed a minute ago, a white-orange-black flower of a shell burst flashed, and a second later an airwave with the usual roar went through the whole body, as if hitting the ears with boxing paws. Following the first, a second shell exploded, a third. Battery. To battle. It's hard to sit under fire, even if it's clear that the enemy is hitting the squares, into the white light. But it's impossible to answer. The rifle doesn't play against artillery, and their own cannons. They are anti-tank, suitable for combat on direct fire, but an artillery duel is not for them. So sit down. Sit and wait. Wait for it to go. They went. Grey boxes on shiny ribbons of caterpillars crawled out one after another from the edge of the forest, dispersed in an uneven line. In the intervals between them, chains of infantrymen stooped like grey target runners. There were no faces to be seen at such a distance. And there was no point in looking at them. Soldier's business, it's sensible to put such a runner on a stump of a fly and smoothly choose a descent. Don't go to Russ. Your death lives there. How many times has this truth been hammered into the heads of foreign invaders, sometimes with swords, sometimes with bullets? But they still get itchy. Why don't they have enough of their own cemeteries? So we are not greedy. Let's select 2 meters. How many attacks and counterattacks were there? Nobody considered. And if someone thought, you can't ask him anymore. The Germans did not manage to force the railway where it was defended by the Red paratroopers and security officers. German soldiers entered the city from the opposite side. On the side where there was no one to protect him. Such was the reality of the first days of October 1941. But this is not the fault of either Captain Frantsuzov, or the fair-haired political instructor, who, with surprised blue eyes, peers into the burnt blades of grass in front of his face, squeezing the stalk of an infantry shovel with his dead fingers, or the last remaining company commander, Stale Nurkov, who gave the order to leave the encirclement of the last group of paratroopers covering the retreat. The next battle was fought by the 201st Airborne Brigade at the Mtsensk line of defense. Thus began the Battle for Moscow. October 3, 1941, Oriel. The city heard, "There is a fight." The city could not hear. The city hoped for a miracle as desperately, intensely and actively as only children and old people can. In a hut on Shiroko Kuznechnaya, near a brick factory, Grandfather Kolya, a stubborn old master, back in early August, with a strong word, kicks and a stick, explained to his younger son why he would not suddenly go to evacuation, and by the end of September, almost legless, hobbled to Red Corner and became eye-to-eye with a dark-faced calm old man. "O all-holy Nicholas, the most beautiful servant of the Lord, a warm intercessor, and everywhere in sorrow a quick helper. Help me, a sinner and a dull one, in this present life." And then slowly turned to the opposite wall. "You see, Tatiana, I haven't forgotten how to pray yet. I'm sorry, I didn't really like my mother-in-law, it's not a secret for you. However, it's a sin not to admit, she was a wise aunt. And, I remember, she always repeated, through the prayers to the Lord of Nicholas the Wonder Worker, the impossible is truly accomplished." The old woman on the photographic card pursed her lips so sternly that perky wrinkles ran up from the corners of her mouth. Along Komsomolskaya, 6-year-old Marochka hurried, almost skipping, more precisely, Marksina. "But what, is she small, if she already helps to run the household?" "True, my grandmother, when for some reason she got together to visit Aunt Tonya, strictly forbade her to stick her nose out of the house." "Yeah, and Galia told her to keep an eye on her sister." "Yes, only Galia did it her own way. How the guys from school came in, and they called somewhere. Marochka, of course, eavesdropped. Well, that is, she didn't eavesdrop, it's not good to eavesdrop, she just stood next to the door, but she didn't hear anything except shoo shoo shoo. Galia also repeated, stay at home. And even locked the door. Marochka quickly became bored. And a little scary, somewhere nearby it thumps, as if thunder is rumbling or there is a war going on. And the war is far away, somewhere beyond Bryansk, as my grandmother used to say. Marochka is still small, she doesn't go to school and doesn't know where he is, Bryansk, but it's definitely not close. But not very small anymore, she knows where her father's key lies. When Dad left for the front, he left the key of the house, and grandmother hid it in a tin box, and the box, on the closet, further away, you need to substitute a chair, and on it, a small stool. And in the box there was still rolled up money and my mother's brooch. And Marochka thought, she must run to the bakery. Grandma will come again sometime. And probably get tired. And the bread is right there. Maybe even white. Grandmother will praise Marochka. No, at first she scolds a little, and then praises, she does not know how to be angry for a long time. But Galka will definitely get it, she promised to look after, and she ran away for a walk, and also a pioneer. Marochka did not remember how much money she needed for bread, she took it with a margin. And where to put? Not in a string bag? They will fall out of the bag. And the blue dress has no pocket. But white with large red flowers has too. True, white is brand new, festive and in general, like a big one. Well, let everyone see that Marochka is already big. And here, on this flower, you can fasten your mother's brooch. The flower is red and my mother's brooch is red. It's a pity that you have to put on a coat on top, but you cannot fasten it. On the street, Marochka immediately hurried, imitating adult passers-by and putting on airs a little. And then suddenly I forgot that I had to hurry. Because I saw horses. First, white, beautiful, like in a book with fairy tales. Well, or like Uncle Grisha in the village, he rolled them with Galia on such. And then, red, ugly. True, when I saw that the redhead was lame, I thought that she was even more beautiful than the white one, although she barely walks, she pulls the cart. On the carts, the Red Army. Not like the ones Marochka saw at the military registration and enlistment office when Dad was seen off. Their faces are dirty, their clothes are also soiled, something is turning white and red from under the clothes, with spots. And that young uncle over there has a bandage on his head, and it also seems to be splashed with red. Marochka still did not really understand anything, and her legs were already rushing her to the house by themselves. Well, let it happen that the grandmother has already returned, and Galia. It's not scary with them. It's not scary at home. Mirochka knows that nothing bad will happen to her at home. And at home, Mirochka frightened the already frightened grandmother to death. She looked at her elegant dress, white and red, and began to rip off, and screamed. From the very morning, excited Kibalchish boys scurried around the city, ran away from lessons, deceived the vigilance of grandmothers and older sisters, left the little ones unattended, appeasing their conscience with the fact that they didn't break through to the evening movie screening. What was happening now was like in a movie, but much more interesting. And even more so, more fun than any game. The boys knew that something terrible was coming. But from afar, the explosions seemed like pops, as if someone nearby was beating the carpet with a beater. And it was almost not scary, but horror how curious. Kibalchish gathered in detachments, snooped here and there, found themselves in the most inappropriate places, and there was no one to call them to order. The fighters of the fighter battalions, the same boys and girls, only a little older, 2 days earlier received an order to break into groups and leave for Ilyets, and a few police patrols today, still dark, were pulled to guard the station. Of course, the guys could not know any of this. But, feeling freedom, they did not hide too much and hid. The main thing is not to catch anyone's eyes. And other people's adults, what do they care what the kids are up to? So Galia, fearing to face the returning grandmother on Komsomolskaya, dragged her friends to Shiroko Kuzniknaya. Yes, but in vain. Girl, you, by any chance, are not Mary Trofimovna's granddaughter? Galia immediately realized that it was her who was called. The angry, thin old man leaned on a stick with one hand, and held on to the gate with the other. Either he was deciding whether to go out into the street or not, or he was simply afraid of falling. Yes, Galia admitted in confusion. And the grandmother, I suppose, does not know where you are not easy to carry, so he simply said, did not even shout, but as if he gave a slap on the back of the head. Come on, go home. Yes, don't forget to tell your grandmother, Nikolai Yegorich, they say, ordered to bow. He glanced around at the boys. And you, Arkarovites, what are you standing with your mouths open? Thinking of orphaning your parents? Run home. And so that they no longer dare to go out into the street without asking. Your Cossack robbers, free life, have run out. At first, Galia thought, the old man looks like an evil wizard. And she sternly scolded herself, when you are almost 12 and you have been a pioneer for 2 years, it is a shame even to think about such nonsense. And in front of my grandmother and Mirochka, it is all the more embarrassing. And it seemed to Jenka that the grandfather's stick was only for pretense. Now he will take it and run after them, and even with his stick. And he will complain to his mother, and then she will sell the pigeons for sure. And Vitka decided, a smart old man, experienced, probably understands more than theirs, and almost not angry, he only pretends. But Grishka did not think about his grandfather, he was annoyed. Friends, it's called. They didn't give a damn about the matter, but an hour ago they just didn't give honest pioneering that they would not back down. You won't help anyone there, grandfather said firmly, as if guessing Grishka's thoughts. Do you feel it's quiet? And, after a pause, he finished. Ours will leave. Ours, retreat? How is it? This thought was 1 on 4, but no one dared to ask again or argue. And just like that, without saying a word, they ran home through the yards, along the impassability. Grishka lived furthest away, at Semenarka, which was an hour at a brisk pace. And all the way the boy doubted, maybe turned back, take a look? What if the grandfather was wrong? He had not reached the house with a dozen steps when a tank drove to the crossroads. Not like the ones shown in If Tomorrow is War. Hostile. By noon, a rumor spread around the hospital that seriously wounded had just been taken out of the central hospital. And this rumor was more like the truth than all the previous rumors. Probably because events unfolded exactly as they were supposed to unfold. No, they really shouldn't, no way. But Leda knew that everything would happen just like that. Now the time has come to admit to herself, where can we pull further? Rumors, and, most likely, something more significant, prompted the head physician and the commissioner of the hospital to gather staff for a short flight and briefly order, to prevent the spread of panic, suggesting to the wounded, once the evacuation has begun, then soon their turn will reach. And, of course, to be on high alert, not going anywhere for a minute. Everything is correct. That's how it should be done. To believe or not to believe. Lida returned to the ward, to the abandoned bucket and mop, and began scrubbing the floor with exaggerated cheerfulness. Nadia, with a frozen, grey face, moved from bed to bed, carefully straightening the blankets, giving water even to those who did not ask, until one of the wounded tugged at her sleeve. "Tired, sister? Go sit." And she obediently sat down on a chair in the corner. She sat for a long time, hardly moving. Lida went out and came back 3 times, but Nadia kept sitting. I returned to the 4th, "Nadia is gone. She ran away somewhere," they said to Lida. And she started looking. "We gotta stick together, now we gotta hold on." And she ran into Nadia on the threshold. "Germans," Nadia said almost soundlessly. She was the first of the hospitals to see the Germans. She jumped out, as if something had pulled her from her place, into the street, and saw. The tanks entered the Red Bridge. Leaning out of the hatch to the waist, the young tanker looked through binoculars. Forward, only forward, without being distracted by anything. As if on purpose, he posed for a fat photographer who stood at the railing and squinted into the viewfinder rather contentedly. Are they not afraid of anything at all? Thought Nadia. Not with hatred, but with surprise. The tanker was fair-haired, stately and kept his back very straight. Like Vanya. At first, Nadia felt anger at herself, and only then hatred. That would be something to shoot at this straight back. So that they don't bury themselves, so that they are afraid. German tanks were moving along Stalin Street, along the tram tracks, on which the red tram stopped. People clung tensely to the windows, ready to recoil at any moment. The carriage driver, as soon as she saw the tanks, closed the doors, but no one demanded to open them, no one tried to escape. Probably, each of us at that moment seemed to have a tram more fragile than a child's toy and more reliable than an icebreaker. Trofimov, a teacher of literature, will write in his diary upon his return, finding calm in the usual action. He will keep a diary for another 124 days. And on 125th he will not return home. And the landlady will burn all his notebooks, out of harm's way. And Vanya will die at night. In the only echelon that managed to leave Oral that day, Nadia and Lida will work in the hospital, as before, but not as before. Because the hospital will become underground. And everything, starting with a vial of iodine and a piece of gauze, will have to be mined at the risk of life. They will survive. In the autumn of 42, a neighbor who wandered around the surrounding villages and exchanged things for food for her completely starving children would tell Lida, in Kamenka, some refugee Varya was hanged for her connection with the partisans. And only in the summer of 43 Lida finds out, it was another Varya. Her Varya will return, aged and tired, and immediately set to work. Change in the hospital, and then, to clear the rubble. Vasyatka will have a scar above his eyebrow. On the day when the Germans will drive the children to the Russian school, he will break the glass on the portrait of Hitler with a slingshot, and the teacher, saving either himself or the boy from the wrath of the headman, will hit the delinquent head on the corner of the table. Manechka will play silently behind the stove for a long time and be afraid to go out into the yard. Almost until the end of the war. And on the 9th of May, 3 widows will gather, Varya, Lida and Nadia. And they will also remain silent. It is not customary to depict widows on steles. And in memory of October 3, 1941, a stele with 3 maternal faces will be installed. After the war. Chapter 3. Summer 2009. I am back. A simple phrase, like those found in primers. And if you taste it, exactly like my mother's pies with cherries, baked according to my grandmother's recipe, even cherries from my grandmother's garden in Fominka. And if you listen carefully, the birds greet the morning, and Mishka yells under the window, either breaking, or smoky before the deadline, or simply broken once and for all voice, Sanka, let's go to football. And if you look closely, here it is, my house is my fortress. It really looks like a fortress, a 5-story Stalin house, rising almost a floor above the grey typical Khrushchevs, and if you climb a turret with a spire, then, they say, the whole city is visible. Maybe that's the way it is, but only none of the boys were there, even if they fill in what they were. In the turret there are some utility rooms, and even, it seems, something related to civil defense. During the exercises, a siren howls from there. It's not scary, maybe a little disturbing, that's all. Are you home? Home is a fortress. And if you feel deeply. That's when a completely non-childish word arises, forever. How was it sung in the song? Parental home is a safe birth. Reliable. Hopeless. The latter because Cemetery draft pulled into the open door of the tram. Godunov chuckled. Well, I caught up with horror. It's time to wrap myself in a sheet and slowly, so that I'm sure I have enough strength, crawl towards the cemetery. At 44. Medicus, who put a red cross on the further service of captain of the third rank Godunov, sweetened the pill. It's not possible in a submarine with such a heart, but on land. In short, he, Godunov Alexander Vassilievich, rides half as much in this life as a wounded hare. It's too early for us to die, we still have things to do at home. I remembered my grandmother's favorite saying, also a song. And half the time it turns out exactly up to 66 years. 6 is a personal code of failure. MES. And the draft is still an ordinary urban one. It smells of dust calcined by the sun, gasoline exhausts, and a holiday. The aromas of perfumes that do not overlap the exhaust gases, are women, tea, not French women, a work, if not a feat, then a holiday, no, just a triumph. Godunov could not sensibly explain. He had long known the habit of finding, without looking for, images literally under his feet. If he hadn't become a good submarine officer, he would certainly have sunk into the life of a very mediocre dreamer poet. I would write about the blue seas and distant countries, which I have never seen in my life, but sodder the bitter muse. For some reason, all the poets, a total of 3, if you count that weirdo who proudly called himself a bard and sang like Vysotsky, used it for inspiration. He, Godunov, only on holidays. And not universally recognized, but personally accepted. Godunov could not sensibly explain. He had long known the habit of finding, without looking for, images literally under his feet. If he hadn't become a good submarine officer, he would certainly have sunk into the life of a very mediocre dreamer poet. I would write about the blue seas and distant countries, which I have never seen in my life, but sodder the bitter muse. For some reason, all the poets, a total of 3, if you count that weirdo who proudly called himself a bard and sang like Vysotsky, used it for inspiration. He, Godunov, only on holidays. And not universally recognized, but personally accepted. Godunov could not sensibly explain. He had long known the habit of finding, without looking for, images literally under his feet. If he hadn't become a good submarine officer, he would certainly have sunk into the life of a very mediocre dreamer poet. I would write about the blue seas and distant countries, which I have never seen in my life, but sodder the bitter muse. For some reason, all the poets, a total of 3, if you count that weirdo who proudly called himself a bard and sang like Vysotsky, used it for inspiration. He, Godunov, only on holidays. And not universally recognized, but personally accepted. Whom he never saw in his life, but soddered the bitter muse. For some reason, all the poets, a total of 3, if you count that weirdo who proudly called himself a bard and sang like Vysotsky, used it for inspiration. He, Godunov, only on holidays. And not universally recognized, but personally accepted. Whom he never saw in his life, but soddered the bitter muse. For some reason, all the poets, a total of 3, if you count that weirdo who proudly called himself a bard and sang like Vysotsky, used it for inspiration. He, Godunov, only on holidays. And not universally recognized, but personally accepted. Today is just such a day. 5th of August. Day of the liberation of Oral from the Nazi invaders. And today there will be no cognac. Today it is white. Because both grandfather frontline soldier and father frontline soldier recognized only little white, and even alcohol. Good, very good day to come home. True, there are no grandfathers, no grandmothers, no mother and father. There is not anyone. And Mishka is gone, he died almost 10 years ago in his own garage, drunk. There is a fortress house, only 2 tram stops to it. Only the apartment in it has long belonged to other people whom he, Sanka Godunov, does not know. When the mother needed money for treatment, the father, stubborn, like all their breed, without telling his son anything, changed the Kopek piece in the center for a one-room shack on the outskirts, in 909. It turns out interesting, the old outskirts of the city have unofficial, but familiar to all the indigenous, and Godunov was from the indigenous, names, Vygonka, Luzhki, Semenarka, Norgorka, and the new people call the microdistrict, yeah, like that, with a capital letter, 909th quarter, as if there were no meadows or pastures there before. Godunov was in this apartment a few times. The windows looked out onto a small square, more like a wasteland, The stunted seedlings had not yet grown, they had not become real trees, in the middle of which stood a white stone that was by no means fabulous. Bronze on the stone, in memory of the courage and steadfastness of the 201st Airborne Brigade, 146th Separate Escort Battalion of the internal troops of the NKVD, shown in battle with the Nazi invaders on the northwestern outskirts of the city of Orel on October 3, 1941. Eternal glory to the heroes. In a battle about which Godunov probably knew everything that could be learned. Because this everything was offensively small, I had to think and understand that these notions may well come into conflict with real history. Godunov was returning home. In the parent Odnushku with windows on the memorial. From the station, across the city, it's almost an hour by tram. The third is already over, and the buxom carriage driver squeaked something into the microphone. What? The granny jumped up in a gauze handkerchief over her carefully curled grey hair. What? The teenager pulled oversized earphones around his skinny neck. And what do you want? The 10th hour, the road is blocked, laying on, calmly answered the peasant, who with equal probability could turn out to be a worker, and a teacher, and some kind of clerk, a cog in the state machine. The car won't move on. The yarn driver barked in solidarity, fortunately not into the microphone. And when it will go, I don't know. 2 hours later, not earlier. So to whom on Mileshkin, you will quickly stomp your feet. Strange, but it was at that moment that Godunov fully realized that he had returned. As soon as they don't call all sorts of markets in the Russian open spaces, but the central market is called milk only in Orel, he was not going to milk. But still got out. The presence of a suitcase does not contribute to a walk in any way, however. After all, it is not so heavy, a suitcase, it contains only a standard travel kit and a laptop, a hitman's dream with a mountain of military history literature, a bunch of alhistorical novels and a few strategies. Godunov did not consider himself either a historian or, God forbid, a gamer, on the 5th or 10, and the tales of supermen, who immediately begin to change history, already pretty tired him. In general, he never put hobbies above service. That is, according to the former wife, he was a rare bore. The former seriously believed, there is nothing at all and at all higher than service for him in this world. It was she who once said, people like him, Sonia Godunov, were created not for service, for service. And in the series of family scenes preceding the divorce, the accusation expressed with complete conviction sounded more often than others, your devices are dearer to you than living people. Somehow, in the appendage, it was thrown, you are also correct, healthy adventurism in you for a penny. You probably didn't climb trees even as a child, didn't fight with boys and didn't drag girls by pigtails. The former was fluent in the notorious female logic, aggravated by higher education and a natural propensity for demagoguery. In a couple of phrases she could lay such an internal contradiction that from one, even very careful, touch detonated. For example, if he began to explain that a good commander must, first of all, be able to find contact with people, he would immediately hear that he has machine thinking and he is a walking instruction, which, of course, is alien to spontaneous, truly human ones. Deeds. Well, at least his wife recognized the professional in him without hesitation. But what's the point of thinking about it now? He returned to Orel, the former settled in St. Petersburg. The love boat crashed, not even about everyday life. Even in a surge of anger he did not consider jackdaw a greenhouse flower. Here the trivial definition, did not get along in character, was most suitable. The work of a lifetime, too, suddenly became the past. And what is his professional experience for Central Russia? That's just it. He has no relatives, no friends, or at least friends here. Somehow it immediately became clear that everyone he could call friends was at the same time colleagues. The thought arose out of place, but he is an ideal hit man. Already almost nothing but memories, a lover of near-historical constructions not connected with this reality, armed with a Nishjak-like laptop. Funny, but not funny at all. He walked along the chain of frozen, I would like to say solemnly, but it came to mind, obsequiously, in accordance with the official will, which raised the spectacle to the rank of tradition, trams to the square of the tankists along the worn, peeled paving slabs in places. But the thought did not move anywhere, froze, clinging to the coincidence with an iron grip. You, Alexander Light Vasilich, arrived at the place of eternal parking not on any day. It's time to think, what if this is not an accident, but the will of fate? They say fate takes care of those who believe in it. Godunov still believed. Precisely believed, and precisely as before, because facts are given to the mind and regular confirmations, while faith is willingly content with the remnants of idealism. And the mind? Well, you, the mind, did not suggest, "It is necessary, comrade captain of the third rank, to correspond to the moment, arrive home at the parade?" There, the police are at all the entrances to the park. Pass mode. Of the civilians, only bureaucratic-looking gentlemen with badges on their jackets move freely back and forth, and anyone who is in uniform, come in without question, whether you are a serviceman, a veteran or a youth soldier. Ah, who is such a gifted uniform for youth soldiers figured it out, right? During it, the youth soldier Sanka Godunov had a uniform similar to the combined arms one. What the kid was now dressed up in most of all resembled the figment of the fantasy of a nameless demobilization fashion designer. Who is this gifted uniform for the UNAMIA came up with, huh? During it, the youth soldier Sanka Godunov had a uniform similar to the combined arms one. What the kid was now dressed up in most of all resembled the figment of the fantasy of a nameless demobilization fashion designer. Who is this gifted uniform for the UNAMIA came up with, huh? During it, the youth soldier Sanka Godunov had a uniform similar to the combined arms one. What the kid was now dressed up in most of all resembled the figment of the fantasy of a nameless demobilization fashion designer. Godunov pulled himself up. This is how they turn into snobs, and then they begin to grumble like an old man all over the world. Boys in Christmas green uniform, decorated with painted epaulets and multicolored aiguillettes, are full of pride. They participate in a real military holiday. How they feel right now is more important than how they look, no? And veterans look at them with approval. The decisive word belongs to the veterans. The area with the 34 and the eternal flame was surrounded by a temporary fence, yellow-black ribbons stretched from one metal rack to another. Plastic chairs were placed inside the perimeter for the veterans. And again Godunov sighed. The creative thought of the organizers is moving in a strange direction. Does no one understand that this hybrid of a construction site and a street eatery can offend someone's feelings, both aesthetic and much deeper and more significant? Again he scolded himself for his snobbery. The crowd thickened. The little ones could no longer maneuver so deftly between adults, and the games moved to the tram line. For some time, will it happen again without any fear, and without grandmother's shouts to jump on the rails? The poignantly familiar, "Where are you now, brother soldiers?" sounded from the speakers on the roof of a nearby minibus, and the air thickened and it became difficult to breathe. Fate, in which Godunov so recklessly believed, blessed him with a sense of the motherland, a sense of blood community that does not require definitions and explanations, does not even require verbal expression. Blessed by two grandfathers, frontline soldiers who lived to see their grandchildren. And yet it was inexplicably personal in what at times came over him like a storm. As if an echo of his own memories, but where would they come from? It's easier to decide for yourself once and for all that this is just a game of the imagination. But Godunov could not stand all kinds of lies, including self-deception and excluding military cunning. The sound of the fanfare cut off the song in mid-sentence, and the presenter, not visible from here, in a well-placed voice, began, professionally imitating delight, singing poetry in a sing-song voice. Godunov's traditional speeches did not irritate him, he simply did not listen to them. From childhood, he learned that he did not come to the rally, to the laying. Laying, so said the grandfather and grandmother, and all the neighbors, frontline soldiers and children of frontline soldiers, and then the grandchildren. A solemn rally dedicated to. He did not listen to the voices of the people, he listened to the people themselves. City administration. Not a crowd, a community. For the sake of the life of future generations. A toddler jumping over tram rails. No one is forgotten, nothing is forgotten. And serious youths. Our eternally young city. And the girl with the cell phone. Overcome any difficulties. And immersed in her thoughts, obviously far from what is happening, a middle-aged woman. Festive mood. And a drunken little man, with a resolute expression on his face, proving something to the ensign of the riot police. Events dedicated to this significant day. And an riot policeman, looking away with professional indifference. Each of them is part of the community, neither subtract nor add. And it is not words that make them common. Memory is not a duty, memory is an honor. That is, not all. It must be admitted that weighty words can also be found among lightweight eloquence. On August 5, 1943, scouts of the 380th Rifle Division, Ivan Sanko and Vasily Obraztsov, hoisted the Eagle Liberation flag over house number 11 on Moskovskaya Street. Lie, dear sir. It is unlikely that on purpose, by malicious intent, such things were done by other people, however. It was not Moscow then, but Stalin. And on the day of the 20th anniversary of the liberation, Marshal of the Soviet Union Ivan Kristoforovich Bagramyan lit the eternal flame at the foot of the monument to tank men. Since then, the fire has not quenched, just as our memory of the soldiers' liberators will never fade. In their honor, twice a year, a red flag is hoisted over the Victory House. Well, what are you waiting for? Shoot. A teacher-looking woman in a burgundy sequined blouse pushed a lanky boy under the elbow. Ma, yes, Karchuka will definitely not get into the frame, there will be only backs in the photo, the son muttered guiltily. Now. The mother promised decisively, and with the confidence of an icebreaker she moved forward, to the fence, let me through. Please skip. Someone stepped aside, someone snapped. I'll take a picture of my daughter, she's there, with a flag. The icebreaker lady announced eagerly. In the gap that formed for a few moments, Godunov saw the Uname banner group, a boy and two girls. And that's it, the crowd closed in. I wonder if the boy managed to take a picture of his sister or not? Godunov thought distantly. His attention was attracted by a round-shouldered elderly woman, somehow the thought did not turn to call her an old woman. Attracted by the fact that it did not attract attention, stood on the sidelines, not joining the crowd and not striving to take a proper place for a veteran inside the perimeter. Or the fact that. No, it just seemed that a friend, and no wonder, an ordinary person. An ordinary person of an unusual, outgoing, era. Grey, short-cropped hair, a dark blue suit. It seems that this fabric is called crepe de chine, Alexander Vassilievich vaguely recalled, order strips. If a woman had attached awards instead of them, it would have turned out, as my grandmother once used to say, gathering grandfather for a meeting of veterans, a whole iconostasis. On the lapel, a banner badge gleams in ruby enamel with golden profiles of 2 leaders and 4 letters below. In one hand is a cane, in the other a few red carnations. Cadets of the Academy of the Federal Security Service are hoisting a duplicate of the liberation flag. The original is stored in St. Petersburg, in the banner funds of the Military Historical Museum of Artillery. Godunov did not recognize other flowers, except for the field, and even carnations. Not at the right time and out of place, I remembered how he came to his future wife for the first date with a bouquet of carnations, and heard, "Are you going to the cemetery, or what?" Then the wife for a long time recalled that incident to him, once and for all deciding for herself, the villainous fate on purpose, to the laughter of people, brought her together with a rare miser. Fate loves those who believe in it. He managed to miss the moment of hoisting. When he raised his eyes, on the spire above the white turret, a scarlet cloth with white letters sewn on it fluttered in the hot blue sky. For motherland, for Stalin. Times are definitely changing. Earlier, Godunov remembered for certain, they just raised a red flag. If the dream of a firm hand overcame even local officials, who, I remember, shied away from one name like hell from incense, it means that they have already begun to bake, and by no means the gentle son of the southern resorts. True, outwardly, so far, everything is decorously noble. One by one, in order of ranking, they lay wreaths and flowers at the pedestal and follow to their cars. The action is over. The cordon has been removed. Now ordinary citizens have the opportunity to approach the monument to the tankers. Modest bouquets lay on a bronze slab near the eternal flame. On the sidelines, young people were joyfully photographed, and there is Katia, standing by the stele with a map of hostilities, looking into the lens. The woman with a bouquet of carnations was the last to approach the monument. She hesitated, laid flowers, hesitated. And, walking heavily, moved to the tram stop. She'll have to wait a long time for the tram, Godunov thought wistfully. And he went in the opposite direction, to the bus. The wolf's legs are being fed, perhaps the minibus drivers will open traffic earlier. Despite the eternal disorder of his life, Godunov could not get used to the atmosphere of hospitals, hotels and premises in which no one lived for a long time. The trivial definition of oppressive did not fit here, this atmosphere just pushed him out. A room pushed out with faded family photographs on the walls, with dusty carpets, with yellowed nylon curtains. And he went, where his eyes look, where his legs carry. He stood at the white stone, at the foot of which someone had placed flowers, red carnations. Now the stone was next to a Russian-style chapel. It was not there when Godunov visited last time. A stone is a border, a limit, a chapel is a warrior guardian. There is safety in numbers. And at its turn, how to know, slowly made his way to the monument in Komsomolsky Square. From adolescence, Godunov had a special relationship with this monument. Why? Do you understand why? What thoughts did Sanka have at the sight of the standard-bearer, who supported his falling comrade with his other hand? I remembered only one. Was the second soldier wounded or killed? Did Godunov think before about overcoming, about the triumph of life over death through suffering and death itself? Hardly. It is necessary to grow up to death by death with your soul. Even now he is not quite sure that he has grown up, and in general, reflections alone are hardly enough for this. This needs to be experienced. Been through. Necessary. Yes, but not to him. For Alexander Vassilievich Godunov, fate, throughout his life, has completely different plans. The closer to the center, the more flowers at the foot of the monuments, the more festive flags and idle townspeople, the higher the degree of fun. In the truest sense of the word. The city park of culture was fragrant with the aromas of a wine and vodka shop, exhaled the smoky heat of shish kebabs. There were invariable attributes of family leisure: ice cream, cakes, cotton candy, inflatable Disney characters on sticks. No, not only Disney ones. Between Mickey Mouse and other Snow Whites, Godunov made out awkward airplanes and dances. For older kids, those who walk hand in hand not with mothers, but hand in hand with girls, there was an assortment of souvenir hearts made in China, phosphorescent bracelets, luminous horns. There was a completely irrational desire to look at the city from the height of the Ferris wheel, and immediately faded away. A long queue lined up for the rides, and he went to an open-air eatery. As one of his colleagues used to say, barbecue without vodka is money down the drain. This kind of agitation had no effect on Godunov. He used shish kebab exclusively with tomato juice. Yes, bread in abundance, circuses, shortage. However, the most enterprising stocked up with firecrackers. Here and there a sound was heard, reminiscent of the popping of a burst tire. Occasionally a pale star managed to rise above the tops of the trees. Godunov never liked the crowd. But he did not like loneliness even more. He was always annoyed by mass celebrations, but fireworks. Fireworks are another matter. Minutes of unblemished celebration. At that moment, when, blocking the miserable pops of firecrackers, the first volley struck, Alexander Vassilievich was overcome with such delight that the former Sanka would have envied. Inexplicable, dumb. The crowd erupted in whistles and inarticulate shouts. Next to Godunov, a beer bottle banged loudly on the asphalt. Somewhere in the distance a child began to cry in fright. A new volley blocked all sounds for a moment. And the crowd roared again. In the sky they went out, leaving grey stitches, salute stars. Meanwhile, a phantasmagoria was happening on Earth. Whitish dots of firecrackers crackled enviously, trying to flare up. Beneath them, a burly inflatable Pegasus hovered heavily. Swamp lights wandered, the townspeople captured on the video cameras of mobile phones. Not an event, no, a spectacle. A hefty guy, crowned with luminous horns, enthusiastically squeezed a fragile girl with angel wings behind her back. Suddenly I thought not about the contemporaries of the Olivites, but about the Muscovites of the 43rd year. Did Moscow hear that evening? Did it see anything besides the first salute? You definitely become a hypocrite, Alexander Vassilievich. It's good if you don't slip into misanthropy in a year or two. A volley, another, and the darkness, which a few lanterns tried in vain to dispel. The crowd cheered in disappointment. No, not darkness, darkness. Another minibus pulled up to the bus stop, already full, and a yellow balloon with painted eyes and a mouth peeked out maliciously from the open door. Hopelessly. The day spent on my feet made itself felt, however. Oh, it wasn't. Why go there, through half the city? Back in his youthful camping days, Godunov learned, the main thing is to choose the right pace of movement, then you can walk for hours, measuring miles. Especially when it's cold. Watching the stars and listening to the wind. And trying not to notice the overly cheerful audience. Failed. At Komsomolsky Square, he was overtaken by a swara. That's right, got it. Two guys in tattered t-shirts, moving in some awkward dashes, managed to kick each other on the run in the classic style of drunken showdowns, that is, anywhere. Two disheveled girls screamed and sobbed thinly, frightened, limping along in high heels. Yes, youngsters frolic. If Godunov had been younger, he would probably have rushed to separate them. Even not so, he feels younger. Here, after all, it's not about physical condition, it's about the mindset, the very one that encourages you to climb not into a fight, but into your pocket for a cell phone. He was ahead of him. Some not too sober bearded man yelled indignantly into the receiver, holding it almost at his outstretched arm. Hello. Roved? Hello, ROVD. There is a murder going on almost under your windows, and you are there, scratching our turnips. Where? I say, right next to you. Yes, in the square. Near, 2 from the pub, I say. And he forgot, fortunately for himself, this slang name for the monument. Unpretentious, after all, human fantasy, even if she has a barn, just a roof over her head. But it was his generation, Sanka Godunov, who thought of it, not young people. Young people don't even have enough vitality for meanness. Waving drunk is yes. And again, for the umpteenth time today, the thought briefly knocked, echoed with pain in the temple. You, Alexander Vassilievich, are a fragment of a different era, buried in the thickness of your own and other people's memories. It's probably not so scary to be a fragment. Worse than an empty beer can. A janitor will pass, a watering machine will pass, and you are gone. There is not even a trace. And the earth itself stores the fragments. In memory. At night Godunov dreamed about the war. Not for the first time. He has never been to any war. But the war did not let him go. Chapter 4. Autumn 2011, Oriel. Yunami Selivanova finished the assembly. Shouted a girl with huge white bows on red foxtails, shaking her hands raised above her head. 35 seconds. Genya, you can do better, another, with bows on dark pigtails, lowered the stopwatch. Will you try again? Yes, well, I nailed my finger again. So go to Comrade Major and ask for a bandage. Yes, in general, I would wrap it in advance. I did it at past competitions, it really helps. Yunami Grishechkin finished the assembly. You might as well take your time, 1 minute and 15 seconds. I'm not going to the competition. Who needs you at the competition? You pass the standards at the post, my grief. And in general, it's good to play the fool, huh? The dark-haired woman rustled at the pages of her notebook. Here. Monday, the chevron is sewn incorrectly. Tuesday, the shoes are not cleaned. Pashka, you alone collected more comments than the entire guard, and points are taken off for this, by the way. If because of you we fly from the first place in the district, it's good for you to say, you're here for the 3rd time. Oh, come here. This is from the next room. What is the theme for the battle sheet? Godunov raised his eyes expressively over the newspaper file. Irina caught her eye and proclaimed. Silence in the guardroom. Nachka. The green budgerigar squawked respectfully and more comfortably intercepted the edge of the shoulder strap with its paws. Godunov chuckled, introducing himself from the outside. Neither give nor take John Silver of the 3rd rank. That's because he fell in love with the impudent feathered one. Almost more than girls with gold earrings, the ass is by no means a fool. He does not peck at jewelry. With a bent finger he tickled the parrot on the neck, asked in an undertone. Say piastres. Bullet Pulachka, the green one cooed affectionately in response. He introduced himself, that is. Nice to meet you. Nachka. The parrot demanded. Iron, command, it's time for the dining room, Godunov said. Well, Alexander Vassilievich, well, 5 more minutes. Slavka and Vika did not make out. After lunch. Yes, after dinner, immediately intervene. You won't really practice already. Leave it. Take command, youth soldier Salnikova. Guards, line up for lunch. Godunov locked the door of the guardhouse behind the departing with 2 of the 4 locks. In the documents of the post, this was designated as additional security measures in connection with the threat of terrorist acts, although nothing like this happened in the city, so as not to jinx it. And also went to starve a worm. Well, do not count, in fact, instant noodles and a couple of marmalade pies bought on the way. On the way to the chief's office, he heard the crackle of a telephone call. First post, Major Rusoka, puzzled silence. So that's the same, have already left. In a minute or 2 they will be. Head of post? One major of the tank troops Sergei Sergeyevich Rusoka exhaled into his bristly blonde mustache. Vasilich, for your first time, you have to get stuck. They called from the cafeteria. Yes, I already figured it out. I'm sorry it happened. I somehow lost track of time today. It happens. I myself forget another day, this is what my name is. Have you tried to calculate how many our fighters pass for 5 days of tests? Rysoka laid a newspaper on the table and began slowly, carefully arranging the dishes with homemade dinner. So the first course, death of the ulcer, is cancelled for today. Yes, and the second for once will be. And that is joy. I didn't count, just figured it out. Adjusted for those who stand not for the first time and are exempted from part of the offsets, it turns out a little more than 100. And with the correction for retakes? So, Sergeyek, I don't seem to have any retakers. Or is the information outdated? No, yours are without retakes, Rysoka consoled. And he added with the caution of an informed optimist, for now. Haven't released the machine yet. But, as you can see, they are training with might and main. Urka got it into her head that they should take first place in the competition. So they are in February. What, 4 months is not enough for you to prepare? What will they train on? Are you still unarmed? It seems that this is what they promised. Well, take a plate, the stew is getting cold. It's as if you don't know that they have been waiting for the promised 3 years. Money is needed and rather big, but philanthropists are in no hurry. Although, if you think about it, what the hell is charity? We all owe the elderly and children. Are you all protesting? The chief of the post smiled mirthlessly. What else do I have left? Vaccination against total disappointment. Out, today for once decided to read the local press. So there, only on the eve of the 3rd of October, the question is once again being discussed, was the defense of Oral or Guderian entered here as a winner of the rally? Fucked up, damn it. As one literary character said, do not read Soviet newspapers before dinner. So I feel, from the locals I will definitely have an ulcer. Instant vermicelli will give you an ulcer, intellectual. Why are you teasing me with offensive words? What kind of intellectual am I to you? I have a very specific occupation and even a military rank, Godunov snorted, scooping up rich homemade soup with undisguised pleasure. And suddenly I thought hard. Every self-respecting intellectual should have a favorite topic, one touch of which causes a chain reaction. As a rule, with devastating consequences for the psycho-emotional state of others. Relatives know about this, and bypass the danger in 10th ways. Distant, well, the distant ones are not so pitiful. No, he never considered himself an intellectual. Moreover, he frankly disliked this word, rightly believing that the day would come when they would beat their faces for such a definition. And he, the captain of the 3rd rank of the Godunov Reserve, the surname itself predisposes to reflection, nothing, they say, lasts forever under the moon, would like to be just among those who will beat. He is not an evil person, but those who sculpt newspaper articles for dates are very tired, and even more so, those who rant about anything from the pulpit and from the box and are ready to pour the truth itself like a lascivious girl. Nevertheless, he had a favorite topic for a long time. Ever since his snotty boyhood, when, wandering aimlessly in the vicinity of his grandfather's village of Malaya Fominka, Sanka Godunov came across a shabby anti-aircraft gun surrounded by stunted panzers interspersed with weeds. On the official tablet, in cloth language, it was said that here, at this very place, where Sanka was now shifting from foot to foot, on the 3rd of October of the 41st year, an unnamed calculation held the defense. Sanka himself did not really understand why he suddenly clutched at his grandfather with a death grip. Tell me, tell me. Grandfather could tell no more than what Sanka already managed to find out. Yes, and there was no grandfather then in Fominka. He was called up 2 weeks earlier, and at that time he stomped as part of a marching company towards an unknown future. This future, having become the past, lay on the top shelf of grandfather's wardrobe and was taken out once a year to take pride of place on the old grandfather's jacket. The medals, for the defense of Moscow, and for the capture of Berlin, after grandfather's death had disappeared. Sanka, by that time already Senior Lieutenant Godunov, did not find the ends, no matter how he searched. It seemed to Alexander Vasilievich that if he saw them now, where? Perhaps from some dealer in stolen antiques. Grandfather was also an artilleryman. He could imagine that fleeting fight. He could tell, and his story did not at all resemble the entertaining stories with which, as usual, he spoiled Sanka. Grandmother, although she remained in her native village, although she survived the occupation, from the first day to the rest, she could not add a word either. Nameless calculation, and that's it. One single anti-aircraft gun against the armored fist of Guderian. And then, What then? Sanka learned about this from his second grandfather, his mother's father, a native Oriole. Back in Tsarist times, his ancestors were listed as Oriole Philistines. Military fate also brought this grandfather to distant lands from his homeland, near Leningrad. But then, after the war, he worked in his native Oriole on the construction of a road machinery plant. When digging a pit, an excavator scooped up a full bucket of spent cartridges mixed with earth, and upon closer examination, a flask, a soldier's star were discovered there. And then the veterans, it's a joke to say, veterans. They were younger than Sanka is now, sent a request to Podolsk, to the archive. And it turned out that here, on the outskirts of Oriole, on October 3, 1941, 2 battalions of the 201st Airborne Brigade were holding the line. And the security officers of the 146th Separate Escort Battalion. But about that now, in the enlightened 2000s of the 21st century, shush. About the paratroopers, as much as you like. But about the guards, God forbid. Move to Ness. However, under Leonid Ilyich, and even more so under Yuri Vladimirovich, it was not forbidden. And even encouraged. A couple of times in the newspapers flashed notes in 12 lines. Moreover, in the senior class, the historian, slandered by the restless Sanka, agreed with the administration of the road machinery plant on an excursion to the memorial. Loudly said, a memorial. Sand grey steely with the outlines of 3 bowed female faces and the eternal flame, framed by a 5-point star. Not a single hint of an event that occupied Sanka more and more, taking on the outlines of the very main theme in life. Auntie from the trade union committee, who was instructed to meet the school children, recited a text memoized once and for all this Sanka already knew, and stood aside, letting the guests pass to the pedestal, to lay flowers. Then came a fundamentally new life stage. He decided to go to the Morflot, hereditary overland. And since he was not offended by either health or intelligence, his fate led him to the Oriole APRK. He served, as they say, did not grieve, for the soul he sprinkled nostalgically poems about his native land, replete with stamps like My Winged City, but, unlike many, he was aware of his place in literature, the penultimate one from the end, and was not even published in battle sheets. Occasionally visiting his small homeland, with the maniacal persistence of the researcher, he continued to look for materials on the defense of Oriole, along the way getting acquainted with all local historians who were interested in the period, and quarreling with a good half of them about whether the actions of paratroopers and security officers could be considered defense. The question, however, this very thing without a fight, sat like a thorn in the mind of Alexander Vassilievich. For the 100th time, he tried to understand how it happened that the commander of the district troops, having all possible information and reserves, did not show himself in any way in organizing the defense. How did it happen that in Oriole, when Guderian's tanks entered it, trams ran peacefully along the rails, packed equipment ready for transportation was piled up on the factory territories, and more than 1,000 wounded remained in hospitals? For the 200th time, Alexander Vassilievich reread a fragment from Eremenko's memoirs, carefully written out in a notebook, and by today he has already memoized them word for word. I knew that at that time there were 4 anti-tank artillery regiments in Oriole. In addition, a howitzer was concentrated in the Oriole Area Artillery Regiment, which was supposed to go under the control of the front, but since it was far from the front line and did not have time to arrive by a certain date, I handed it over to the Oriole Military District to strengthen the defense of the city. The district headquarters also had several infantry units located in the city itself. The chief of staff of the district answered me by phone that they understood the situation and that they would organize the defense of Oriole properly. He even assured me that Oriole would not be surrendered to the enemy in any case. Well, will not be surrendered is, to put it mildly, maximalism. But that's why the only ones who defended themselves, winning, no, not winning, gnawing every hour to make it possible to transfer troops near Mtsensk, were the Chekists, a question of questions, although, again, no, just one of the painful questions. As for the paratroopers, they were from the Stavka Reserve and arrived in the city just before the battle. And where are all those who were at the disposal of the district headquarters? For the 300th time, Godunov acted out possible scenarios, invariably starting with the assumption, and if, returning to the long empty Odnushka of the Khrushchev type on the outskirts of Oriole, he devoted all his time to everyday thoughts, in which direction to direct his fate and the fight against the instantly developed syndrome of a sailor who went ashore forever, that is, with a total disappointment in life outside the cruiser. She acted as a faithful ally in this struggle, one, as the classic would say, but a fiery passion. The desire to get to the bottom of why under Oriole in October 1941 everything went awry, accompanied by an absurd thought, Oh, there would be an opportunity to replay. Strange as it may seem, the highly wise IFS of computer strategies and historical books served as the catalyst. Like the majority, the epithet silent is more than appropriate here, because the majority does not flicker on the screen, does not publish odious memoirs, does not aestheticize, does not shock, does not judge, does not swear, and if it does mean, then, as a rule, on the sly, he, Godunov, had a limited set of social roles in real life. Son, grandson, commander, subordinate, it's all in the past. The passenger of the minibus, the buyer in the store, the neighbor of the quarrelsome granny, the melancholy grandpa and another 250 to 300 souls living in an ordinary Khrushchev. With all the richness of imagination, no more than a dozen ordinary roles will be typed. Is it a matter of strategy? However, Godunov admitted with a sigh, it is flattering at 15 to feel like a genius and a helmsman. And when you are 3 times more, your fate, if you do not blink to face the truth, to match the Khrushchev, typical, unpromising and non-repairable, then gaming ambitions, to put it mildly, are inadequate. And in general, even during the period of teenage socialization, Alexander Vassilievich did not try on the role of a stirrer of the earth. An air shaker, that's all right, anyone is capable of this. Especially if the glass was not the last. Nevertheless, he became addicted to strategy games, but it all started during his service with innocent Tetris and Solitaire. More precisely, it began with the fact that he was sickened, weary and fed up with the production of the most important of the arts. The former heroes seemed archaic, like tube televisions, the new ones often offended his aesthetic sense, and Godunov had it, although he, who did not recognize the lady's word aesthetics, usually said cleanliness. The search for oneself, even more painful than in youth, was fairly delayed, and there was no longer a financially preoccupied wife or well-wishing friends around. That is, there was nothing that makes up the life of an ordinary prosperous person. Sometimes it seemed to him that the world around him was artificial and empty, like a white and red Coca-Cola can. People do not live, but only carry out the most primitive program: sleep, work, eat, copulate, sleep, work. To get rid of this feeling, Godunov, having turned off the annoyingly mumbling Zomboyaskik, took out a couple of albums in dark cherry calico bindings from the closet and plunged into the moments of that real world frozen on paper. His own world of unspent hopes. Here on one sheet are pictures from the parents' wedding and from his school graduation. Father is in an iron tunic with a stand-up collar, already without shoulder straps and buttonholes, but brass buttons with stars have not yet been torn off. For those post-war years, it was normal, many frontline soldiers worn out their second term. Here is a wide-eyed, short-haired boy in an unrumpled flank with a guise on his shoulders and a star-shaped anchor on the buckle. The first lump in a sailor. Here are cheerful faces under peakless caps, muscles play under tight-fitting vests, heavy oars of a L-6D are raised with 2 even wings, rowing competitions on the day of the Soviet Navy. And then photos of the officers' years went, either in a tunic, then in a jacket, then in a work uniform in a deer warhead, 5, leaning his hand on the bulkhead. The face is tired, the already thin nose is completely pointed, the clean-shaven cheeks are sinking. Yes. Now, of course, Godunov looks more presentable. Over the years he has acquired a small commander's belly, grey hair flickers, friends at work, I remember, laughed, like a polar fox on the skin, a neatly trimmed small mustache covers the scar on the dissected in the nursery lit fight. But the officer bearing is still proud and the sailor's hands are strong. And as for the wrinkles on the forehead, so he, is not a bride, there is no need to show off. Yes, and not in front of anyone. However, he did not even doubt that he would come out of this abnormal isolation, in comparison with which autonomous navigation was equivalent to a festive gathering in an aristocratic club, and try on a new life role. In the meantime, he was only quietly laughing at himself, that's an senile habit, flipping through albums and remembering. Meanwhile, life, in the meantime, kindly, childishly mischievously, laughed at him. A couple of years ago, he would never have thought that the position of a school military instructor would become the next step on his career ladder. Truly, he would know where to fall. He did not experience euphoria from the acquired business. And who said that in the absence of euphoria, one cannot put one's soul into work? Or at the very least, do your duty. In the list of the most necessary human qualities, conscientiousness would take Godunov first place. Enthusiasm, not to be confused with idiotic euphoria. The second. The absence of euphoria made it possible to maintain peace of mind and clarity of thought in the conditions of permanent women's squabbles, complicated by the disproportion between the educational level of the squabblers and their own standard of living. The presence of enthusiasm provoked Alexander Vassilievich to actions. Having gutted his wardrobes and suitcases, Godunov was able to equip 3 guys. This was the beginning of the Navy Reserve Club, whose members immediately began to be called Sanker's cabin boys behind their backs. Further, in the Council of Veterans of the Armed Forces, they managed to get the addresses of retired sailors. Every day for 3 weeks, Alexander Vassilievich, dressed in uniform and taking his first cabin boys in tow, went to visit. The calculation turned out to be correct. They not only rejoiced at the uninvited guests, but also presented them with uniforms, whoever could. Literally torn from the heart, but not one refused. 24 cabin boys, 24 complete sets. And at the same time, the ready composition of the Guard of Honor for the post? 1. This is the external side, which allowed the headmistress to visually demonstrate to all sorts of different commissions the successes of military patriotic education, which, however, did not prevent her from languidly dismissing the requests of the military instructor to allocate at least a permanent office for the club, not to mention the model of the machine gun, a very toy expensive. A much more important result, I was building a cabin boy under the Andreevsky flag. Suddenly the oncoming servicemen began to salute. Symbolic? Yes. There were other symbols as well. Not inspiring. To put it bluntly, ugly. Alexander Vassilievich looked after a sailing and motor yacht, quietly rusting on the pier near the boat station. Unlike river trams and other pleasure pelvises, this beauty was not humiliated before commercial manipulations. She simply died, like an abandoned aristocrat in exile. Godunov began to make inquiries, and found out that it was on the balance sheet near the region. In other words, it was once presented by someone to fathers and breadwinners, but they simply did not figure out where to attach it. For sure it was in the midst of an election campaign and then completely forgotten. Plot for Saltykov-Shchedrin. With his usual thoroughness and perseverance, Godunov began to upholster the marble thresholds. I got melancholy and sciatica, and the result was summed up by another head of something there, hacking in his hearts. Yes, let him rot. Of course, the categorical refusal was presented to the cabin boys in a less, categorical form. But it so happened, a mere coincidence? Or a coincidence called fate, that from that moment rust and rot also started in the club. Yes, not the best left. Yes, Godunov did not lose control over the situation. However, a dreary question, like all eternal ones, settled in his head: what for? The captain did not drink vodka, which threw the Trudovic and the deputy for administrative and economic affairs into bewilderment, the last of the endangered tribe of school peasants. And they were delighted. Now, a man came to the team in his prime, which means that, without skimping on tradition, you can think in the back room for 3. Now they looked sympathetically, having come to the only possible conclusion: coded, because he does not look like a patient. In Godunov's kitchen cabinet, a bottle of cognac, opened on Navy Day 2 years ago, spent its lonely life. And in general, combining cognac with eternal Russian questions is like drowning in a glass of water, theoretically possible, but practically difficult to implement. So Alexander Vassilievich ate the bitterness of defeat with pasta. Once upon a time, an exquisite foreign dish, which turned into a bachelor's meal in our country, was ennobled with meat and nostalgically called naval pasta. Godunov dined under the pressure of TV news. The news is typical every day, not only bland, but also, it seems, chlorinated, like tap water, and just in time for dinner. Trivial thoughts about the loss of ideals appeared as uninvited guests. Would we be in the same tough situation if the war had not taken the best? And again the woodpecker, stupefied with insomnia, pounded on the head. Oh, if only I could win back. Sergeyik, but if you were in Oral, well, let's say, in September of the 41st year, how would you build a defense? Based on today's knowledge? What do you think? Is it possible to block all tank dangerous directions with the really available forces? Chapter 5. Autumn 2011, Oriel. Larissa Mikhailovna Sizova, Deputy Director for Educational Work, studied the entries in her ledger for a long time and carefully, counting the trophies after the inspection raid, finally took off her glasses and, impressively patting them on the notebook, said, I respect your convictions, Alexander Vassilievich, but from the point of view of methodology, you are not acting quite right. I take into account your lack of pedagogical education and, a fundamentally different profiling experience. However, you should consider that you are working with school children. They need to be given a ready concept. No hypotheses. No admissions. And how then to teach them to think logically? Godunov asked with absolutely sincere bewilderment. Within the framework of the concept, everything within the framework of the concept. By the way, I am a historian, and, I dare to believe, I give an idea of causal relationships to children in my lessons. Larissa Mikhailovna, perhaps I'm wrong, Godunov began admonishingly, but what's wrong with being on electives? I emphasize, electives. In our classes, we try to model historical events based on potentialities that were not realized in reality, but could well. If only, sighed exaggeratedly, by the way, the historian. History, Alexander Vassilievich, does not tolerate the subjunctive mood. Godunov heard this truth, polished to a shine by constant use, a month ago at the next Sabbat of local historians, where, as usual, he penetrated under the guise of an enthusiastic listener, a person from the street, to join this very specific cast. Oh, how difficult it is. Again and again it was about the events of October 3, 1941. Again and again, the brutal Revtsov and the assertive Ovsyannikov met in a duel. Revtsov was one of the officials from culture. Along the way he was a professor at the Pedagogical Institute, invariably headed the commissions under the slogan, argue, make noise and disperse, etc. In short, he was an authority in law. Ovsyannikov article and style, Lenin on an armored car. Tribune of the people and leader of a highly effective search party. Revtsov spat with clever words, Ovsyannikov cut the truth womb. 2 zeros were invisibly but tangibly displayed on an invisible scoreboard. Alexander Vassilievich made a conclusion for himself long ago. The dispute of enthusiastic people is always, as one of his colleagues used to say, with an open visor on the embrasure. Beautiful and pointless. How many times did he promise himself not to go to local history events? But today, there was a reason to be present. If the instructions of the direct superiors last no more than a quarter of an hour, he manages to minute by minute. Can we consider that we have an agreement? Swade smiled, showing patronizing friendliness, and summed up. Please, Alexander Vassilievich, within a week or two, finalize the plan of extracurricular activities and bring it for approval. Everyone, now we definitely have time. Godunov caught himself thinking that he rejoiced, like a schoolboy at the news that there would be no last lesson. Yes, colleagues are probably right when they laugh at him. His enthusiasm becomes some kind of mania. And if it were otherwise, would it really be passion? Not later than 2 days ago, he foolishly poked his head into the local archive, like a Papuan into an ice hole, having in his hands not some kind of solid request, but only a letter, begged all the same from the same Larissa Mikhailovna, of course, with a seal and a signature, but they, as it turned out literally from the threshold, did not give the necessary weight to a sheet of A4 offset paper. An old lady of watchman appearance, glancing over the early perestroika analog of the reception desk, slurred indistinctly. Earned to go. Having deciphered the intricate message with an effort, Godunov realized that he was being sent to the 6th office. And almost spat. Superstitious, like many sailors, he considered the 6 to be a personal bad luck code. An analog lady of the official type was sitting behind a digital device such as a laptop and clicking the mouse in the rhythm of a funeral march. A bad feeling took shape. And the gift of speech. What do you want? The illusion of communication with the grocery store saleswoman was so great that Alexander Vassilievich almost blurted out, 2 kilos of bananas, please. Yes, if he had blurted out, nothing would have changed, because no matter how you multiply 0, it's all the same, a donut hole. While he explained at length that he was seriously interested in the events of October 41 in the Oriel region and asked to be admitted to the archival documents corresponding to the period, the lady looked at him as if he had encroached on her wallet or, holy. Honor. As far as I understand, even those documents that were kept in the party archive under the heading secret have long been declassified. Godunov tried to attack. Why do you need it? The lady counterattacked on the move. That is? Alexander Vassilievich, suppressing a sigh, mentally stated that the tactics of officials always force them to defend themselves. Well, that is, why do you need these materials? Are you a historian? Are you writing a dissertation? No, I am a former submariner. I have been interested in. So you're not an expert? The official continued to develop the offensive. Alexander Vassilievich easily caught the usual subtext. You have nothing to do in retirement, so you go. You saw people's brains. I have been dealing with the issue for many years. Godunov understood that these words could be equated with surrender. We would go to the library, there in the local history department they would pick up something for you. Everything that has ever been published, I believe, I have already read. Well, damn it, baby talk, complete cretinism, what else can you say? So that convincingly, and without a mat? And then, any book is biased to one degree or another, and the primary source. You understand that these are archival documents, and if we give them out to anyone who wants them, they will turn into dust. Wow, it turns out that the lady is capable of not only pressure, but also pathos. And many, ask? Godunov chuckled. He had nothing to lose. Many, few. Here you are. The official lowered the pathos to the mark cool. In short, here are 2 collections for you, sit down and read. I think it will be just right for those who are interested. 2 dusty great bricks were published either during the reign of Tsar Pease, or under General Secretary Kukuruznik. Godunov did not want to look at the release date to the point of nausea, and were a masterpiece of nomenclature-indifferent historiography. A slurry of documents that ceased to be a delicacy about 30 years ago even in the form of cuts. I recalled a playful phrase from an antediluvian advertisement, "Why is Alexander Vasilich not eating anything with us?" Godunov solemnly laid the bricks on the bureaucratic table and left in English. Having cooled down, he pondered. And I found the only possible way to break through into the archive. And he was going to implement this option today. It was necessary to enlist the support of heavy artillery in the person of Ovsyannikov. He was somewhat familiar with Ovsyannikov. In sum, this means that the Venerable knew his fellow non-professional by sight, but, as it turned out, he could not remember the name, although he honestly tried. And he agreed to help. Oh, happiness. No questions asked. He called someone, talked for a minute and a half and with the intonation, "What's the problem?" told Godunov. "Come back tomorrow afternoon. Ask Natalia Sergeyevna. She will advise further." I would have been happy, but Alexander Vasilievich, with some tired detachment, thought, in order to get the golden key to the cherished door, one must turn into Pinocchio. However, someone is destined to remain a log in life, which is not so bad if you, with all the precautions, do not turn over, do not leave, be the first to carry out in case of fire, are moved from office to office, until you suddenly find yourself in a cozy corner, at a table on which they whiten festively and turn solid yellow coveted materials. He had no premonitions, neither good nor bad, neither distinct nor vague. He took 5 lessons, cancelled the cabin boys' class to make it on time. On the way I caught a couple of sausages in the dough. I rode in a minibus and thought about something abstract. Should I get a dog? Or is a cat better? You don't need to walk the cat. And it's enough for fish from time to time to sprinkle dry food and clean the aquarium. Fish is an option in case he gets lazy at all. The dog, at least, will walk him twice a day. I settled on the cat option. If anything, and without the owner will not be lost. Where did this idea come from? And the jester knows her. As it surfaced, it disappeared, and there is no point in elevating any bad thought to the rank of foreboding. True, there was another thought. Passed casually, on a tangent to consciousness, when outside the window of the minibus, without any solemnity, the wedding cortege rushed by, and Godunov recalled what he had heard in the news, and today is a happy day, the 11th of November 11. Which adds up to a 6, the subconscious yelped paranoidly. Apart from the first and second premonitions, Alexander Vasilievich had no premonitions. There was anticipation, yes. With this very anticipation, he hesitated where to start, and pushed towards him a surprisingly new folder of the same stationery pattern, expecting to see anything but himself, with 2 rhombuses in buttonholes, on a black and white photograph, not having time not only to turn yellow, even to wear out, and the photo is on the spread of the identity card. And on the next page, the full name is inscribed calligraphically, clearly whose. The first thought, what the, was instantly replaced by another, well, like in a movie, damn it. The third thought, probably even more intelligible, did not have time. Because Godunov took the certificate in his hands. Chapter 6. Autumn 1941, Oriel. Still, the 6 planted a pig. Irrational, but true. Like in the movies. 6D technology. Full immersion. In a minute and a half, Godunov was pushed 3 times, cursed twice, and finally adapted to carry some kind of box, heavy, bastard. Around, uniform pandemonium. More precisely, shapeless. The vast majority of the participants in the so far incomprehensible event, as well as Godunov himself, in civilian clothes, and only a few, in paramilitary clothes. You can't tell at first glance whether they have jackets of this cut, or jackets without insignia. That is, it is semi-dash, a sample of the 30s. Another minute and a half was enough to figure out, the movement has a clear direction from the factory buildings to the fence, where stacks of boxes large and small are already rising. And after a moment, he realized that he always knew for sure about the existence of parallel realities and the possibility of time travel. It's good that I didn't have time to get a cat. How is it that there will be no cars? With such an intonation, and the corresponding decibels, in films about the war, signalmen try to shout to someone on the other end of the line. And the wire, according to the laws of the genre, is cut off. The office windows are wide open. In one, a girl flickers, stupidly dragging some folders from place to place. In another, a grey-haired man froze monumentally with a telephone receiver in his hand. Although he is grey-haired, he is still a man, not a grandfather. Do you think I will trample the equipment on my hump? Since July, everyone has been pulling with the evacuation. They pulled it out, your mother's leg. It suddenly dawned on Godunov that it was clearly not November, but such a cheerful September in golden azure. Indian summer, warm. It remains to find out one thing, and only. Whether the displacement in space was added to the displacement in time. The sixth sense prompted, if such castling takes place, then the score goes to some tens of meters. Within the eagle. Reflexively he thrust his hand into the pocket of his dusty jacket. Not the one he had on a few minutes ago. The clothes clearly corresponded to the time, although it did not somehow feel like it was from someone else's shoulder. And the certificate is in place, as if he had put it himself. Or maybe he himself. Okay, let's leave the theory for a calmer moment, Godunov decided, finally unloading the box. Now is the time for practical action. If events develop as they are supposed to develop, then the former commander of the district, Lieutenant General Ramazov, now commands the 13th Army, no, probably already the troops of the North Caucasian district, and literally from day to day will lead the 56th Army, that the one that is to liberate Rostov-on-Don. Yes, and his successor Korochkin is probably already on the northwestern front. So, in Oral, Tyran. Theoretically. But practically, hell knows where he is at this time and what he is doing. It's also indicative. After all, they won't take out this equipment, they won't take it out for sure, they will please Uncle Guderian. Although he was not sour here anyway, he will be. And the archives, I suppose, are already. However, in calm times, these are archives, paper hoarders. In these circumstances, for a different piece of paper, life. And not alone. You wanted to know? Please. Senior Major of the State Security, don't give a damn about the hillock. So go ahead. Godunov looked around. How exactly he materialized in the middle of the factory yard, it's better not to think about it. Anyway, you won't think of anything, if you believe a bunch of random novels, and now also your own intuition. And that's why no one was interested in him out of nowhere who had taken on a person. This is understandable. In a normal working team, most of the workers know each other, and a stranger would be noticed instantly. But, apparently, there is no team. There are people who have been brought together by sad necessity. What is called random. There are only about half a dozen strong, hard-working men. A dozen unconvincingly invigorating grandfathers, clearly from the cadre, and even from hereditary workers. A month ago, these grandfathers were probably personal pensioners, and at the first call they came to their native plant. Several women whose faces you don't have to look long to figure out, refugees. Well, teen boys. Which are quicker, probably from the Fizuzhniks. Others are probably also refugees. It is interesting, and he, Godunov, in his old-fashioned, more precisely, authentic, what words come to mind on the basis of stress? A jacket dusted as if walking 50 miles in it. With whom is it identified? For some reason, there was no doubt. If you stop now, think, hesitate, and unnecessary attention to his person is guaranteed. For some reason, an antediluvian anecdote surfaced, mixed with fairly sensible thoughts, something distinguished Sterlitz from the inhabitants of Germany, either a courageous face, or a strong-willed profile, or a parachute dragging behind him. Whatever one may say, it turns out that it is best to show up yourself. if only because he has never been Sterlitz and can only guess about the methods of collecting information, and the attempt will lead, 99 out of 100, to exposing him as a spy. But if you go into the office and talk, only without the noise and other special effects. We enter confidently, as befits a person invested with power, and, calmly, Masha, I'm Dubrovsky. With a quick step, he approached the wide-open door, oriented himself, turned left and predictably ran into a massive painted door with a laconic inscription Director. He knocked once and, without waiting for an answer, went in. He briefly glanced at the grey-haired man, trying with his peripheral vision to pick out a calendar or a folder of newspapers, to figure out what date is the most important thing today. It's in movie books that the clues are generously hung and scattered by the authors who care about their heroes so that the heroic hitman is not tormented by the unknown for a long time. But either he, Godunov, seemed to the unknown force that brought him here, not heroic enough, or the logic of his stay in the past suggested a quest of a high level of complexity. In a word, you don't have a tear-off calendar, or a Pravda file on top of stacks of papers, or a piano in the bushes, and where would the bushes come from in the room? A stunted geranium in a pot on the windowsill, that's all the vegetation. It won't even fit a whistle, let alone a piano. Under the bewildered, wary look of the grey-haired man, he pulled out a certificate from his inner pocket. I wish you well. Senior Major of State Security Godunov Alexander Vasilievich. He paused, allowing the grey-haired man to wonder. Well, introduce yourself, of course. Nikolai Kuzmich Potapov, acting director, FIO, and was surprised. That surprise was somehow languid and inexpressive. Probably, thought Godunov, for the last few days, various bosses have been going around here in shoals. But neither the machines nor the people have been taken out so far. That is, the uncle would now recognize as the highest authorities the one by whose will the trucks would appear at the factory gates. You have to understand that if you, were sent, then there will still be an evacuation? Or, Potapov raised an eyebrow questioningly. Well done, man, immediately takes right off the bat, and forward, as they say, to new horizons. And let's take a walk along the alley and discuss all our, carefully answered Godunov. If you are lucky, you will be able to get hold of the most necessary information. The autumn sun gave the last warmth to the still free city. On the right side of the entrance one could see an alley translucent through. More precisely, Godunov remembered an article from a recently read local history book with pictures, either Trubnikov Boulevard, or Trubnikov Boulevard, which appeared back in pre-revolutionary times and miraculously survived until the beginning of the 21st century. This means that the sixth sense did not deceive. Fate chose the Tekmash plant, native to the older brother of one of the grandfathers, for the landing of the hitman. I wonder if it's realistic to cross paths with a great-uncle? However, he is still not in the city now. In the first weeks of the war he volunteered for the front along with other factory workers. Yushkin cat, found when over the curiosities of hitting his head to break. Here, apparently, such a thing begins that you can be left without a head at all, in the most direct and ugly sense. Kuzmich did not keep an expectant silence for long. You see, the peasant was completely sick of the uncertainty. Comrade Senior Major, are we going or what? We would have to decide how to proceed further. Since July, we will kill people, but here at least they knew for sure. And the machines, as a last resort, you can bury them somewhere nearby, well, at least in the Medvedev forest, and mark the place. But, again, cars unneeded, cars. And I went and called, all in vain. No, they say, cars, period. How about not if? Godunov thoughtfully kicked a pebble with the toe of his boot, raised his head, and was taken aback. A convoy was moving towards them along the Moscow highway, dusty. You can't really see it yet, but tank turrets were easily guessed in the outlines of the vehicles. That's it, star, thought Godunov, growing cold. The heart gasped at the heels and immediately crawled in the opposite direction, taking its place according to the law of nature. At the head of the column 3 armored cars with tank turrets slapped on top were impudently rolling. That these were Soviet armored vehicles, Godunov was 100% sure. Yes, and Kuzmich reacted to the column, which by this time caught up with them, moderately obscenely. This is how they react not to the enemy, but to the authorities, who are disgusted with their mother-in-law. Following the armored cars, a couple of cars rushed by, a lorry with quadruple Maxims in the back, and then 2 more lorries with fighters. Tyrant from the city leaned. Kuzmich could not restrain himself, and coughed either from the dust raised by the column, or choking on the end of the phrase. Well, here you are, Alexander Vasilievich. There is no one older than you in the city now. thoughts rushed straight to the quarry. This means that the district commander had just abandoned the city, which had been covering Moscow since the time of Ivan the Terrible. Ek travels, just like the bureaucrats of the heyday of wild democracy, in a hurry and with protection. What a bitch! If they had given free rein to this tourist, he would have draped across the Urals. Under the conditions of so-called totalitarianism, the fugitive commander was found only in Tambov. And, it seems, he escaped with a slight fright. After serving for 6 months, he began to wander from position to position. In a somewhat strange sequence, Deputy Commander of the Army, Commander of the Army, Deputy Commander, Commander. He did not become famous for heroic deeds, he was not honored with a heroic death. From a public point of view. To hell with him, after all, with Tyran. A rat from a ship makes it easier for the captain. Potapov keeps quiet, but looks expectantly. It is clear to him that the matter is dark. And he certainly has no questions. Why did the senior major of state security suddenly appear on the territory of the enterprise entrusted to him? Is it for good or for bad? Is the hasty departure of Tyran agreed with the command, or is this Chekist also puzzled by what he saw? How puzzled? I understand, something needs to be done, urgently. I don't know what, but I have a plan, the memory suggested ironically. Fortunately, I also suggested something else, which was repeatedly scrolled in my head during nightly vigils at the computer. Here's what, Nikolai Kuzmich, can you repair tanks? After a little hesitation, he asked the acting officer, who was instantly alert. So there are no tanks, comrade senior major. Everything, even training ones, was collected from the pine forest in July, and to the front. And then there was the commander, you yourself saw, he took the last armored cars. There will be tanks, Nikolai Kuzmich. We just have to stand for the day and hold out for the night. Well, we'll start the third shop, it's a trifling matter, unpack some of our machines and pick up some from the Medvedev workers. Here is the repair shop. With people, however, it will be worse, there are few personnel left. Well, okay, we will gather the old people around the city, we will train the youth. Here you go, sort out the boxes, prepare the workshop, and what doesn't fit, we'll try to evacuate tomorrow evening, Godunov concluded on his way back to the office and again thought, a smart man. And he added to himself, I would also like to know what date it is tomorrow. And at that moment, as in an adventure movie for teenagers in the ever-mature mind of the inhabitants, a loudspeaker came to life on the pole. During September 29th, our troops fought stubborn battles with the enemy on the entire front. According to updated data, on September 26th, not 98 German aircraft were destroyed, but 113 aircraft. On September 27th, 150 German aircraft were destroyed, of which 37 aircraft were shot down in air battles and 113 aircraft were destroyed at airfields. Our losses are 28 aircraft. In a 7-day battle in the northwestern direction of the front, the tank unit of Colonel Pogodin dealt a heavy blow to the German troops. The enemy lost 1,500 soldiers and officers killed and wounded. Our tankers destroyed 12 enemy tanks, 2 long-range guns, 2 artillery and 9 mortar batteries, 36 anti-tank guns. 14 medium and small enemy tanks, 8 tankettes, 3 anti-tank guns and 3 mortar batteries were knocked out and put out of action. 29th. This means that the Oryol-Bryansk defensive will begin tomorrow. In the summary of failures, not a word. It is understandable, purely psychological. But already tomorrow, Godunov remembered this quite accurately, the Germans would break through the defenses of the 13th and 50th armies and their mobile formations would rush with all their might to Tula. And the day after tomorrow evening, Stalin will instruct Major General Ilyashenko to take command of the 1st Special Guards Rifle Corps, which is at the stage of formation. And he will give everything about all 3 days, and by the night from the 1st to the 2nd this period will shrink to 1 day. He, Godunov, also has 1 day to start taking at least some action. Theoretically, everything seemed, if not simple, but clear, like God's day. In fact, it is the evening of September 29, 1941, and complete, ambiguity. It is in a computer toy that your powers are clearly defined and limited to a set of permissible actions. In reality though, colleagues, not without reason, considered Godunov a phlegmatic person, but they knew that if necessary, he would issue a plan of action literally on the go. On its coat of arms, one should draw a trivial, but invariably justifying oneself, we must get involved in a fight, and then we'll see. It remained to be hoped that in the confusion that accompanies any anarchy, Godunov's powers would be such as he entrusted to himself. Businesslike saying goodbye to the director, the resident of the future went out into the street, surveyed the vaguely familiar urban landscape for the second time, devoid of the usual hubbub and movement, and caught his eye on the MK standing on the opposite side of the road. The grubby sergeant had just closed the hood and was peering into the thin twilight with a discouraged look. It must be understood that the chick lagged behind the flock, which had moved half an hour earlier, contrary to the laws of nature, to the northeast. Godunov silently showed an open ID. Which direction are you going? The question, against his will, sounded harsh, like some film in Kavdishnika. The driver hesitated. By order of Lieutenant General Tyron, a car from the district headquarters garage? Godunov mercifully helped the guy. Yes sir. Are we running? Let's run, the Gavroche agreed with unexpected ease and even defiance. Why are we running so disorganized? It stalled twice. The guy glanced at the MK with dislike. Bad, so we are following the car? Yes. I've only been 3 days. He began to make excuses, stammered, looked inquiringly at Godunov. The car is needed in the city. Under my responsibility. Don't we? If the driver trailed off again. Guilty. Allow me to apply. Godunov waved his hand. The question is understandable without long words. We are not leaving the city. Bye, he mentally finished. That's great. The guy was delighted with such spontaneity that Godunov finally established himself in his opinion. He was not yet used to triangles, and to the form in general. What's your name? Sergeant Demon, the driver reported cheerfully. And he added hesitantly, Sergey. You need to understand the road to the military registration and enlistment office, you know? Yes sir. Go. The hour is, of course, already late. But time is military. So. Chapter 7. September 29, 1941, Oriel. We got there in 10 minutes. In such a short time, it is unrealistic to come up with a sensible explanation why this whole senior major of state security arrived for inspection in a frankly unpresentable form and without any documents confirming his authority, like a Gogol auditor, incognito. Aha, and also an imposter. Yes, here think at least a day, at least for a whole week, figs, what a good thing you can think of. In addition to the sacramental, impudence is the second happiness. Of course, he, Godunov, is not an actor, God knows what, and a trickster lying without a twinge of conscience is not his role, but there is nothing to do, he will have to act. Yes, and bossy anger, if you think about it, is not so distantly related to confusion. Heads and tails of one coin, and you need to play so that the coin lays heads. Eagle. The regional military enlistment office was located in a 2-story mansion, clearly pre-revolutionary construction. Hopes were justified, if only we were so lucky, so as not to jinx it. The door was not only not locked, but also wide open, and even carefully propped up with a pebble. Godunov, feigning imperturbability on his face, entered and looked around. From the niche on the left, a Red Army soldier stepped out in a disciplined manner. Who are you, comrade? A military commissar on the spot? Godunov showed his ID. That's right, comrade senior major. Even the answer prescribed by the charter could not hide the surprise of the officer on duty. See you through. Foaming, escort. And what do you want, guys? I'm not the only one to be at a loss. However, I don't think that it's more fun together in her, my dear. 50 steps down half-dark stairs and corridors, and a brightly lit doorway. Godunov intuitively understood that they were already waiting for him. The attendant must have called. An event out of the ordinary, her whole general, by army standards, it is not known why and from where he appeared. A tall pilot major with a bandage covering his left eye, with blonde hair combed back from his forehead, energetically rose to meet. I wish you good health, comrade senior major. Military commissar of the city of Oriel, Major Odintsov. Allow your documents. Wow. Godunov thought respectfully, instantly correcting his attitude to the local prudence. The military commissar does not rely on the duty officer and the Russian maybe, he wants to make sure himself. Against the backdrop of the flight of the district commander and the mess, which even with a big stretch could not be called an evacuation, the military enlistment office suddenly presented itself as a paradise island of order and efficiency. During the years of service, Godunov learned to catch such things instantly. And this immediately disposed him to the major. Comrade senior major. At the moment, the forces of the garrison. This, of course, is very important. Without any exaggeration, vitally important. However, you still have to portray the boss's anger. To avoid follow-up questions. Odintsov, apparently, is not one of the gougers. Nothing surprises you, Comrade Major? Godunov severely interrupted both the military commissar and his own untimely thoughts. For example, that I arrived unannounced? Withstood a short, in one breath, but very significant pause. Or my, so to speak, appearance? I beg your pardon, Odintsov began dryly. There is a reason. What are you talking about, the forces of the garrison? The chief of staff of the district confidently reports to the commander of the Bryansk front that you have artillery here, at least give a general battle, but in reality? And the thing, apparently, seems. The anti-aircraft guns reliably cover the railway junction, no? I don't even ask about aviation. There were no peppy reports here. But personally, it didn't work out for me, as you can see. I was bombed 2 kilometers from the city. Godunov took a breath. So I can't show anything other than a certificate to confirm my authority. You'll have to take my word for it. Aha, that's just it, what to believe. That's it, that for now. Until there is someone with enough authority to contact headquarters, but, fools are lucky, I remember my grandmother liked to repeat. Here is the opportunity to check it out. And who is he, Sonya Godunov, if not a fool? The most logical thought, he should sit out, look around and be puzzled by his own fate. Of course, he had. More precisely, he did not arise. She hid like a grey mouse in the darkest corner of consciousness, and did not appear. A normal person who does not exaggerate the role of the individual in history and does not underestimate the significance of his own life, and most importantly, who knows how everything will end by and large, that is, aware not only about May and September 45, but also about August 91, October 93 and many other less memorable months of slow but steady sliding down. What would a normal person do? I would burn the certificate. Fortunately, matches, here they are, in a side pocket, together with a pack of Jubek cigarettes that has not yet been opened, but already thoroughly crumpled, make up all his personal property, and here, so to speak, options are possible, such as not be mistaken for a deserter or a spy, and keep your head on your shoulders. Perhaps even try to influence something. After all, afterthought is not a completely useless thing. The most memorable of the alhistorical novels offered a wide variety of behaviors to achieve these goals. Some possibilities even seemed feasible. But here's the bad luck, he had one life, which did not give any room for experiment. Well, let's say we managed to choose the right course of action the first time. Fine. But it takes time to get things done. Again, let's assume it's insignificant. By peacetime standards, yeah. The war has its time. And in these few months, the fall of Oral, and the defense of Tula, and, quite likely, the Battle of Moscow will fit. And every day, your afterlife, Godunov, will depreciate. He had one life, which did not give any scope for experiment. Well, let's say we managed to choose the right course of action the first time. Fine. But it takes time to get things done. Again, let's assume it's insignificant. By peacetime standards, yeah. The war has its time. And in these few months, the fall of Oral, and the defense of Tula, and, quite likely, the Battle of Moscow will fit. And every day, your afterlife, Godunov, will depreciate. He had one life, which did not give any scope for experiment. Well, let's say we managed to choose the right course of action the first time. Fine. But it takes time to get things done. Again, let's assume it's insignificant. By peacetime standards, yeah. The war has its time. And in these few months, the fall of Oral, and the defense of Tula, and, quite likely, the Battle of Moscow will fit. And every day, your afterlife, Godunov, will depreciate. And in general, too many assumptions. Too much to think about it seriously. But it's just that you don't think at all or think not seriously, probably it won't work. But still, the saying about a squirrel in a wheel has been known for a long time. So, if you please, Alexander Vasilich, squeak and run. And not just like that, but really, creating not panic, but forward movement. Break into the past with all your might, having such a certificate in your pocket, and sit out? An excellent idea in all respects, to sit out in a submarine, on which they fuck with depth charges. And if you don't twist your soul, you immediately decided, you're not so normal, you're right. Your school colleagues turned out to be right. To stand aside from what is happening here and now, gaining some future chances. Tomorrow's chance, it either will be, or not. Especially given the wartime and the absence of any documents, except for the notorious certificate. So, in full accordance with the traditions of the alhistorical genre, we will consider this document a direct indication of what needs to be done. Act, and until the time is right to drive into that very closet of memory and under a strong castle, the thought of your consonants will not be revealed today and, God forbid, not tomorrow. War has its own terms. And therefore, impudent so impudent. And quickly. Enough thunder and lightning, it's time to move on to a constructive dialogue. Comrade Odintsov, let me know the name and patronymic? Igor Grigorievich. Igor Grigorievich, as you probably already understood, I am authorized to inspect the readiness of the city for defense. However, here it is just right to talk not about inspection, but about organizing the defense of the city from scratch. So, what military units are available now and which ones can we have in a day or two? Fortunately, Odintsov did not hang on to the question of confirmation of authority, he immediately got involved in the work. The most combat-ready unit is the 146th Separate Escort Battalion of the NKVD. There are still 700 volunteers, the detachment was formed under the NKVD Directorate. Yeah, that's what you had to prove. Godunov grunted unhappily to himself. Why rejoice? If there were the notorious 5 regiments in the city, would he start as a military commissar with 2 battalions of Chekists, huh? There are about 500,000 militiamen who are recovering in hospitals, here the data must be clarified, Odintsov concluded with a guilty look. And hesitantly added. In the morning there were 2 more commandant platoons and 3 BA-10s, but today they left the city, together with the commander of the district and the chief of staff, in an unknown direction. Well, let it be, in the unknown. History will judge, it's a pity that history is not a military tribunal, thought Godunov. And he asked the most important, but, by all appearances, already meaningless question, let's get back to this. Colonel Pekarev reported to Colonel General Eremenko about 4 anti-tank and 1 howitzer artillery regiments. Do they exist in any form? Yes, if 1645 and 4 ZIS, 2 can be called that. But I strongly doubt that the Germans will be convinced of this. As for the howitzer regiment, it is rather a traveling museum. There are 24 122mm howitzers of the 10th model, I have no idea where they were dug up at all. Anti-tank guns with crews, but the antiques are almost ownerless, at most 8 crews can be completed. All right, at least something, said Godunov. And he added to himself, well, very something. In addition, there are 10 aircraft at the airfield, 7 U-2s, 5 of which are in full working order and 3 UT-2s. Only now there is no one to fly on them. More details can be obtained from the Deputy Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel Believ. As for weapons and ammunition, the Brigadier Military Intendant Obolensky has the most complete information, he generally knows about all the property in the district to the last footcloth. Godunov felt like a fabulously anecdotal old woman with nothing. Only now it was not necessary to count on the appearance of not only a goldfish, but even some kind of dried roach. Let's go, Comrade Major, to the district headquarters. Time is running out, so we'll figure out on the spot who is into what much. And here's something else. I would like to dress appropriately. Is it possible? We'll decide, Comrade Senior Major, Odintsov said confidently after a few moments of thought, called some Nina Fyodorovna, and then reported, everything is in order. On the way to the military department we will stop by. I'll order the car ready. At the same time, I would like to have a bite to eat, even if it were on the way, the stomach hinted with dreary hopelessness. You don't need a car. I got personal here. She fought off the escort of the former commander of the district. Godunov caught himself thinking that he involuntarily singled out the biting word former with his voice. Although de Yere Tyran is still in command. To be impudent is to be so impudent, the impostor once again cheered himself up. For those half an hour that the high authorities were absent, the driver managed to bring himself into his proper form, even the confusion in his eyes diminished, and now he could rightfully be called Sergeant Demon. Orienting without a hint, in a matter of minutes he delivered the comrades of the commanders to the military department. But Nina Fyodorovna was just right to be called Ninochka, such a pretty girl of about 20, except that the old woman's bun on the top of her head spoiled the impression a little. A little fussing and a little embarrassed, not every day there are buyers of such a high rank, she picked up the shape and personally screwed silver-plated rhombuses, radiant with ruby enamel, to the maroon cloth of buttonholes. The form sat unusually. And in general, looking in the mirror, captain of the third-rank Godunov felt like a mummer. There is little honor in putting on other people's shoulder straps. Thank you, he said to Ninochka, who loomed behind him with an inquiring expression on her face, and realized that her voice sounded harsh. Comrade Senior Major, she began timidly. I have a question, if I may. I'm listening, Godunov replied without much pleasure. He himself had too many questions swirling in his head right now. Is it true, you won't hand over the eagle? We'll do our best, he said confidently. Chapter 8. September 29, 1941, Oriel. Let's do our best. An unsophisticated answer. Doctors give such answers when the prognosis is very bad. And officials, when they simply do not want to do anything. And Ninochka, it seems, was inspired. Well, okay, hope is a good friend, it happens that it helps out. How would one hope to make friends, eh? And not with some sleazy one, but with one that at first sight inspires confidence and conviction. Everything will be fine and even better. And so that she had at least minimal reserves and a certain amount of ammunition with her. Only this already turns out to be a portrait not of hope, but of some other, more respectable lady. It is unlikely that it will be possible to meet with which on a short leg. Yours, Alexander Vasilich, hope, pale, but resolute, just right, as in a bad movie, rush with a trench tool and a brutal expression on the tanks. Though, approaching the end of the first day of the hit. From fatigue and an abundance of impressions, the head was buzzing like a Vesh bell. It would have been worth taking a nap on the way for at least a quarter of an hour, perhaps it would have cleared up in the brains. And sleep, not in one eye, probably for the same reasons. It remained only once again to envy the invaluable experience of Comrade Sterlitz. Godunov peered into the darkness, trying to catch the signs of the eagle, which was familiar to him. The lesson, of course, is useless, but it helped to concentrate. And just in time, the car stopped in front of the mansion, in the style of which the architect, who certainly knew how to please the tastes of the provincial nobility, resourcefully combined pomposity and provinciality. To add the last reflections, already sluggish, like etched cockroaches, it was possible exactly at the moment when a heavy door with a forged handle opened with a creak. Behind such a door, a peppy butler should have been found, and not a tired attendant who perked up only at a glance at the certificate. But the district deputy chief of staff, Lieutenant Colonel Believ, a heavily built, thick-set man of about 35, did not show surprise. Maybe Odintsov warned him? Aha, tell me more, mentally prepared. When would you be able to? If only delegated to whom? Anyway, intuitively, Godunov was afraid of such people who were not surprised at anything. Persons in the line of duty were spinning on the tongue with a tenacious look a little askance, although, to be honest, I never saw anything bad from them, and after the usual greetings, he hurried to take the bull by the horns, with an authoritative recitative giving out everything that I thought up along the way. Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, it is necessary to assemble the commanders of all units stationed in Orel and all the heads of services as soon as possible. And one more thing, Godunov breathed in, preparing to throw himself headlong into the pool. I need a HF with Colonel General Eremenko. Comrade Senior Major, VCH is only in the office of the district commander, and it is sealed. The situation is such that it is impossible to delay. Open the office, Godunov ordered. His grandmother liked to repeat, when you take off your head, you don't cry for your hair. Little Sanka did not catch the essence, imagining something completely utterly utter. Then, of course, I began to understand. But it's only now that I really got into it. And the picture turned out just the same surreal, with a bias in horror. The deputy chief of staff, still not showing, hopefully, simply not showing, any emotions, took out a key from a monstrous, to match the moment, safe. Having removed the HF receiver from the apparatus, Godunov mentally crossed himself. Here it is, the first serious intervention in history. God willing, not the last. Eremenko at the apparatus, came the receiver before he had time to mentally prepare. Comrade Colonel General, Senior Major of State Security Godunov is at the apparatus. I was sent to the Oriel Military District by the headquarters of the Supreme High Command with the aim of inspecting the preparation of the district for defense. However, tonight, the commander of the district, Lieutenant General Tyron, and the chief of staff of the district, Colonel Pekarev, left the city and departed in a northeast direction, taking a deep breath. Due to the lack of centralized leadership in the district and in accordance with the powers given to me by the headquarters, I take command of the district in the Oriel defensive region. He took a breath again. There was silence on the other end of the line. I wanted to believe that it was good, this silence, and hope that the commander of the Bryansk front does not inform the general headquarters about this conversation, at least until the time. As I managed to find out, the information about the composition and number of troops in the district, in particular about 5 artillery regiments, presented to you by Colonel Pekarev, does not correspond to reality. And, most importantly, according to information received from absolutely reliable sources, if only it didn't occur to Eremenko to find out what kind of sources these are. On the morning of September 30th, the 2nd Panzer Group of the enemy will strike at the junction of the 13th Army and the operational group of Major General Yermakov. The 24th Motorized Corps will go to Orel, and the 47th Motorized Corps, in the direction of Sevsk, Karachev, Bryansk. The enemy has detailed maps of the area and the possibility of him using forest roads cannot be ruled out. What's in Orel? The commander asked sharply. As far as I know, now in Orel there are only about 2,000 bayonets. The mobilization reserve has yet to be assessed, but I don't think it's great. If possible, provide assistance with tanks and support with aircraft, an unceremonious statement, of course, but what if something breaks off? With our powers, we can only die heroically. Here is Tyron an asshole. It turns out that Eremenko was not only silent in thought, he also managed to fully penetrate. He ran away, bitch, left the whole front with a bare ass. He paused. There will be tanks for you. I won't give a lot, but there will be. Rifle regiment of ladies, I can't take it anymore. Eremenko cleared his throat, and in the next couple of minutes Godunov learned a lot of new things, but of little value in the light of the situation requiring practical solutions, about the moral and psychological image of the district command and about the prospects for developing the relationship of these individuals with a number of domestic animals and Heinz Guderian personally. It is unlikely that any of what he heard would be permissible to include in his memoirs. Live to see your memoirs, Godunov chuckled, feeling like a very specific hitman. The Comfront does not react so expressively out of nowhere. With the regiment I will send another 10,000 bottles of KS. Hold on, Godunov, otherwise the whole front is a pipe. Hold on. What else is left for me, on a submarine? Godunov repeated in his mind. He hung up and turned to the deputy chief of staff. Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, do you know Nikolai Kuzmich Potapov? Of course, Comrade Senior Major, Belyaev replied calmly. As calmly as if he was expecting this question. No, well, not thoughts, he, after all, reads. Although, in the light of current events, it is just right to believe in any mysticism, but still somehow I can't believe it. Destiny, yes. Well, he always believed that fate, no matter how bizarrely she maneuvered, was on his side. And now is not the time or place to lose this faith. So, Belyev's calmness and ingenuity can be attributed to rich life experience. We will assume that once again we were lucky. The deputy chief of staff is also a good man. Yeah, the idle ones fled, the efficient ones remained. But how did you, experienced and efficient, manage to please Guderian so much that the echoes of this joy can be heard even in his memoirs, and at the same time throw an apple of discord to local historians? And chickens are counted in every autumn. It is still unknown what successes you will achieve and where your unexpected progressor ambitions will lead you. What can you say about him? I won't say bad things. Surovo. Well anyway, he is setting up a tank repair shop at his plant. Help him. Look in hospitals for recovering repairmen, driver mechanics, and in general tankers, tractor drivers and former MTS workers. Well, collect information on convalescents of other military specialties. And we will prepare the hospital for evacuation. We will discuss more at the meeting. Major Odintsov is gathering everyone now. I believe he will be done by 20:00. At that moment, the office door swung open. Ivan Trofimovich, let's go, my dear, let's have tea at night. Looking, the newcomer wanted to add something else, but stopped short, noticing Godunov. I wish you good health, comrade commander. The evening guest of Lieutenant Colonel Belyaev, despite the uniform of a brigade commander, seemed to Godunov a native of the 19th century, a stately old man, as if descended from a portrait of the era of jewels and balls. Godunov involuntarily felt the urge to straighten his shoulders, so well and beautifully did the uniform sit on the newcomer. Brigadier Military Commander Obolensky, head of supply of the Oriel Military District. At the Catcher and the Beast runs, another grandmother's saying surfaced in my memory. Hello, Comrade Obolensky. Senior Major of State Security Godunov, from today I am responsible for the defense of Oriel. Well, whatever one may say, it is not easy, the share of a hitman. Only to introduce myself for today's endless day for the third time, or the fourth. Woo! That means that the headquarters found out about our outrages, the old man frowned. It is incomprehensible to the mind, the front is suffocating without heavy machine guns, and here in our warehouse there are already 200 pieces of Degcherevshpagan machine guns of the 38th model, brand new, in factory Greece. We have not been able to send them to the front since August. Tyran is languishing over them, like Tsar Koshi over gold. Your Tyran has completely withered away, Godunov almost escaped, but an inner voice commented maliciously, he is just as much ours as yours. Well, we waited until you sent them to the front, but the front, to you. What else is the former commander over there? This time, he consciously emphasized the word former with his voice. Well, Comrade Divisional Commander, let's go eat what God sent, and then we'll talk, Obolensky said softly, but in his tone Godunov seemed to be reproached, or not a reproach. Okay, I found time to dive into the depths of psychology. Especially when you consider that the proposal is very welcome. In Obolensky's office, very similar to Believsky's, a table had already been laid in the center of which stood a giant samovar, polished to a mirror shine. A seasoned sergeant in his 40s with a chic, Mulievant as Godunov thought, mustache was putting the finishing touches on an attractive still life. Afanasy Petrovich, today, if you please, we have two guests, Obolensky said at ease, somehow at home. The sergeant major, without saying a word, with a deft movement got a couple more cutlery from the cupboard leaning to the side and sent them to the table, after which, after exchanging glances with the owner of the office, he instantly disappeared. Oh, and grandfather's orderly is not easy, and he himself, oh, how difficult. Godunov did not even catch the moment when the foreman left the premises. It seems that he was distracted for a while, looking at the wealth sent down to the starving. We have a hereditary scout, Comrade Divisional Commander, Afanasy Petrovich, the owner of the office chuckled, immediately interpreting the guest's surprised look. I myself am still surprised how cleverly he does it, although I have known him for, 10 years. Yes, sit down and eat. As I understand it, such things will soon wrap up in our country that eating without haste, as a human being, will seem like a heavenly dream. Ivan Trofimovich, well, why are you standing there? Tea is not at a party, and at your feet, as people have long noticed, there is no truth. You are right, Godunov admitted, warming his cold hands on a cup for no reason at all. You are right about our affairs. You and I have 2, maybe 3 days left for everything, so we need to use everything exploding, burning and shooting, but wisely, he thought. Are there explosives, for example, in warehouses? Well, one that it would not be ashamed to say about. It will gain 100 kilograms, Obolensky answered without batting an eyelid. However, there is still melanitis. It has remained from Tsarist times, a terrible, between us speaking, muck. He looked at Godunov, then at Believ, as if looking for sympathy. But there is a lot of this vileness, read 20 tons. We wanted to give it to the builders, but they shied away like hell from incense, and so it lay. On lack of fish, as they say, and cancer is a fish. You can't even imagine how good it is that you were in time. Godunov perked up a little. Hands warmed up, even the blood rushed to the cheeks. That's just good, he malinizes yours, or that, how it explodes. Obolensky hastened to reassure. Yes, you eat, homemade cookies. My wife decided to pamper me today, as she felt that I would have guests. So, in the spring I ordered to take a sample from each ton and carry out tests, and I can assure you that all 20 tons are fit for business. There are also explosives in the shells, Believ noted. Ivan Trofimovich, my dear man, the quartermaster smiled. I understand that I have long since left my gymnasium years and Latin verbs would hardly have been given to me without difficulty now. However, I still remember very well what we have on the farm. What are the projectiles? Godunov asked. Jet, 4 aircraft. Well, those that are RS-132. They were brought in about a week ago, not a lot, not a little, 8,000. What's the point of them? There are no planes anyway, you can't put Pikale ones on the U-2, Obolensky sighed. This is how the hospitable host sighs, on the table which suddenly did not have simple bread. Ah, no, comrade Brigadier Commander. Godunov shook his head. I think we use shells differently. But tell me, do we have anti-tank rifles at our disposal? He asked, not counting on an affirmative answer. What is not there is not there, Obolensky sighed again, guns have not reached us. Before the war, we were considered a deep rear. Fortunately, at least there are some tools. Yes, Comrade Odintsov told me about these guns, Godunov chuckled ironically. Especially a lot of good things, about howitzers. If it weren't for the enemy, it would be just right to take the pioneers on excursions to these antiques, tell them about the imperialist. Euro Comrade, Commander, in vain, the quartermaster shook his head. Igor Grigorievich, no offense to him, he walked under the table when these howitzers smashed the Germans. And you, Comrade Divisional Commander, surely remember. Artilleryman, Godunov guessed, and said aloud. Excuse me generously, I'm not strong in artillery. And Obolensky, seriously carried away, continued. But the howitzers really are in trouble, God forbid, there will be calculations for the third part. However, it is possible to cope with this trouble. True, the age of the soldiers is too big, but we have about 30 old howitzers in Ural. And if we also look at the convalescents in hospitals, Godunov picked up the thought and concluded, we can handle it. And again he mentally added, like a spell, I want to believe, oh, how I want to. I especially want to recommend you Father John from the Church of the Transfiguration, in the world of Ivan Grigorievich Semsky. So, it seems that at this moment there is not a single functioning church in Ural, Godunov recalled. No, of course, he is not an expert, but at a recent seminar of the Society for the Preservation of Monuments, a lady vaguely familiar from previous seminars read a report about this. We are old friends. Our mothers had a fence in the estate in Pyatnitskaya Sloboda. Meanwhile Obolensky continued with that intonation with which one should talk over tea, without regard to the circumstances, and Godunov could not help but marvel at the self-control of the old officer. He is an artilleryman from God, I vouch for this, and just the same howitzer. He already accepted San in his 20s, after some events in his private life, as they say. You don't think badly, he is not one of the ideological enemies, nothing of the kind is listed behind him. As the church was closed, they even took him to work in the Oblakiv, and he was in good standing. And our archive is located in the building of the Transfiguration Church, you see, how wonderfully fate decreed. The archive, of course, has already been evacuated, but not all. Despite what is left, Ivan Grigorievich is listed. Well, I will not hide, it serves. Yes, but here, apparently, the land of unafraid commissaries. So believe after that lovers to speculate about the mute totalitarianism and totalitarian muteness. I'm sure that at such a time he won't think about it, and there's no reason for him to sit out, a military bone, as they say. Obolensky summed up, finished his tea, carefully pushed his cup and saucer aside, and began in a completely teacher's tone, with feeling, with plainly and with the arrangement, list what the district warehouses are rich in. D-Shike, Melanet, howitzers. People. Who else can be put under arms? The district, you must understand, was swept clean, if memory serves. In July they formed the 20th Army, and then the Rifle Division, which in the usual history became famous during the defense of Tula, and there were some marching battalions, more than a dozen, for sure. So he was right when he told Eremenko about mobilization reserves, right? What do we have today, which has long been evening? It is known for certain about 700 militias, and not anyhow, the battalion, it's a joke to say, was created under the NKVD Directorate. Let's add security guards. Well, let's timidly recall about 300 guys and girls from the fighter groups. But we need artillerymen, sappers, pilots would be a man, at least a little. The authors of numerous alternatives, colorfully depicting the advantages of after-knowledge, you would be here, they would tell the poor amateur local historian where to get specialists from and what bushes to joke about. And at the same time, how to transport this philharmonic. Memory, well, at least you tell me something life-affirming. It is convenient in a computer strategy, here they are, all your resources, neatly packaged in squares. And most importantly, if something went wrong, and awry, and across the plans, you can always beat it, yeah. And there is no need in a Johnny tone of a person, rejoicing that he is still only a potential dead person, to announce to everyone and everyone, they say, we can handle it. Chip and Dale arrived in one person, now he will save and rescue everyone, tumble down the enemies on the very Hitler don't cry, and in the final it will be beautiful to trample underfoot the defeated Guderian. And what does the computer strategy have to do with it? Really you, Alexander Light Vasilich, neither life nor service taught systematic thinking? So come on, systematize if you don't want to drown. I sighed. I chewed the biscuits, almost not feeling the taste. He sighed again. Drank tea. He asked the owner for a piece of paper and a pencil. The last time he wrote with a pen, and even then with a poster, in unforgettable cadet times. It's not good to provoke unnecessary suspicions. He, in and of itself, is still a piano on human legs, a whole, translated into normal combined arms language, a major general who fell into a frontline city almost from the sky. It remains to be hoped that old films and modern historians are lying about the general spy mania. Okay, I've already decided, now it's irrelevant. Anyway, the countdown has already begun, and from the moment when it will be revealed that the imposter has led the defense, he, Godunov, is separated by several days, at best a week. And further forecasts to a certain extent depend on the effectiveness of his actions. And generally speaking, whoever is destined to be hanged will not drown. So once said the grandmother, entering, in the most literal sense of the word, into a burning hut to take out a cat with newborn kittens. And it would be interesting to meet my grandmother, she is very close, in Fominka. Aha, come on, chronotourist. Dream. Thoughts went wild. Although this has never happened before, even in emergency situations. However, this one was, not even extraordinary. The devil knows how to talk about it at all, without resurrecting the bosun's bend in memory. Godunov evenly, albeit without the help of a ruler, drew out a piece of paper on the cells and began to write in them what was unambiguously available. Some of the empty cells will be filled in during the meeting, some will continue to be depressing with morning whiteness. On the back, Godunov, recalling his couch thoughts about the possibilities and prospects, threw out a list of questions. The picture was becoming clearer, but no more rosy. And, as always in difficult situations, he began to talk to himself. Well, comrade imposter, shall we do something? Asked an inner voice tired of lack of sleep and shocks languidly. I'm not an imposter, I'm mobilized from the future, Godunov snapped, no more energetically. Aha, senior major of the Navy of the Russian Federation. Come on, go ahead, build defense on land, show a master class. It will be cooler than any Marine Corps. The alter ego was traditionally stubborn and sarcastic. And this tradition created the illusion of stability, and as if something clicked in the brain, the situation began to be perceived as fantastic. The city was suddenly seen by a ship in the conditions of autonomy, whatever the threat, one should rely only on one's own strength. Chapter 9. September 30th, 1941, Oriel. And the cat wept for the strength of those striped cattle, Godunov thought after the meeting, relaxing in Obolensky's office on a leather sofa with a high back framed by carved wood. The sofa was hard, but for some reason such ones always seemed soft on the TV screen. It was a pleasure to lie around. The host, having given the honored guest a thought embroidered with poppies, politely departed. Is it possible that your daughter does needlework? Or is it the wife? Well, the one that bakes cookies, and, admittedly, it bakes excellently. But for some reason I wanted to think that it was my daughter, and certainly very beautiful. Well, I found time to think in the spirit of, a fellow preoccupied not only with the historical fate. Also a reaction to stress and overwork, I guess. Now I would like motherwort. But for some reason, for the first time in my life, I wanted vodka. Specifically, I wanted two. They all had 3 hours to rest, no more. Although, if you think about it, not everyone. Odintsov, out, fussing, preparing the morning departure, contacting someone, deciding something. He, as high authorities, who should be protected for future big decisions, was given a whole 3 hours to rest. But I didn't sleep, and that's it. After tossing and turning for about 15 minutes, Godunov realized that he had failed in the fight against insomnia, and until his imagination took it into his head to extrapolate this everyday situation to everything that was to come, global, he got up, turned on the table lamp and again began to meditate on the drawn sheet. Some of what was concisely outlined in the squares had already been embodied in an appeal to the population of the city and in orders. Something else was to come, in the papers of orders and in real actions. It would seem that a lot has already been thought out and done, but, nevertheless, it is not enough to the point of despair. It seems that the headquarters of the defense of the city has been formed, and the scope of work has been outlined, and the defense of the city and its environs, as it seemed like a kind of Trishka's kaftan, and now it seems that the holes in it cannot be patched up. And it is far from the fact that all the holes could be seen. And that tomorrow the kaftan will not leak in another place, will not spread along the seam, swept into a living thread. Oh, Alexander Vasilich, you are a brave little tailor. It's just a pity that the ending will not be fabulous at all. Transport, transport, transport. The head of the distance, a grandfather grey from lack of sleep in a railway jacket, at first only frowned in martyrdom, but then he got into a tragicomic spirit. At least shoot, at least hang, at least cut with a blunt knife. There is no rolling stock, it's hard to. I myself will cling to the train instead of the locomotive. And still no, he began to bend dark knotted fingers. Coal, kerosene, machinists, repairmen. He choked, caught his breath and, continuing to puff indignantly, promised one engine by tomorrow evening. One. But iron. The silent serious brig military doctor, the head of the army hospital base, instantly perked up. Does this mean that we are immediately preparing the wounded for evacuation? And no one dared to argue with him. Unless a chubby man in a tightly buttoned shirt, second secretary of the regional committee of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks, Comrade Ignatov, Believ introduced him to Godunov, say yes changed his mind, waved his hand. And the Brigvoenvrak already clearly, as if written, listed how many wounded should be taken out of one hospital, from another, from a third, how many medical staff, yes, more medicines, dressings. We need cars. Let it be just a little, 2 or 3. Deploy an evacuation center at the station. Just in the evening, everything will be ready for dispatch. I will agree with Tula that they are ready to accept. Now it was the turn of the head of the transport economy to make a helpless gesture. His slurred speech boiled down to a sad, to put it mildly, curiosity. He, the boss, exists, but there is no management. What remains of the economy after all the mobilizations is only suitable for the Komsomol for scrap metal. Something can be done. But very something. It takes a couple of smart auto mechanics to do that. Which he doesn't have. Because mobilization. Potapov promised to help. And the party secretary, as it turned out, already had some ideas about transport, which were immediately put into words and included in the plan of appeal to the residents of the city. Godunov listened, asked questions, listened. And episodes from books and films, well known from school years, popped up in my memory. Can be delivered by trams. Leningrad and Odessa trams carrying goods to the front line. And why is a brick factory not a fortified point? Street fighting in Stalingrad. Lists of convalescents by military specialties. But this episode from officers, although it is before our eyes, is better not to remember now. He, just in time, to the place and time, but does not contribute to the preservation of clarity of mind. Well, nothing. Godunov listened, made notes in the boxes, and again asked questions, more often, clarifying what he had just heard, sometimes, returning to what was left unfinished. And yet, how is the situation with the air defense of the railway junction? The situation was exactly as he expected. To drive away, they drive away, but there is nothing to give an impressive warning. After all, he, Godunov, did not hit the sky with a finger, depicting a scolding. He remembered from the stories of a friend of the commissioner of search engines, who was a kid during the war, how the railway station burned. Yes, and I myself managed to catch a glimpse of something while driving from Tekmash to the military registration and enlistment office. True, nothing on a dramatic scale, more like traces of ordinary, domestic, fires, but there are too many of them, traces, too much. And what do you want, Alexander Vasilich? The district so rapidly turned into a frontline district that its anti-aircraft cover remained the same as that of the rear. Let's think about how else we can cover the railway junction. And again, material resources, human resources, and the notorious human resource, or, as Ignatov put it, the moral and political spirit of the Oriel people. And then he began to explain in a hoarse, cold voice, damn fascists are not only throwing bombs, but also agitation that in the current situation it can be worse than bombs. Fighters, they say, well-fed captivity and guaranteed life, the civilian population, peace and quiet. The German soldier, they say, brings liberation from the primitive Jewish Bolshevik slavery, bent, bastards. And European culture, and the commissars make you shoot at your liberator. We all understand, comrades. He coughed painfully, caught his breath, continued with an effort, that this propaganda will not be of decisive importance, however. However, something needs to be countered, Godunov concluded, resolutely interrupting the untimely agitation, and it is best to fight them with their own weapons. What is our propaganda based on? Solidarity, Tellman, Rot Front? Whether we want to admit it or not, this is peacetime propaganda. Where are those now who could accept this propaganda with their hearts? They sit in concentration camps. And an ordinary German, who was dressed in a grey uniform and ordered, "Drang nach Osten." He is not up to solidarity. He should save his own head and return to his Frau and Kinders with arms and legs. And it will be hard for him to come back. Because we protect our home. And we will defend him at all costs, we ourselves will not stand behind the price, and we will ask the enemy in all respects. This is what we need to talk about. It is necessary to drive it into the heads, hammer it in. By any means. In leaflets, by radio. And what? Wouldn't the radio station reach Bryansk? And behind Bryansk they are already sitting and listening to what they like. And they remember. Once or twice they will get stronger, they will be completely imbued. He looked at Ignatov, he was scribbling something intently in a notebook. Well, we are not too lazy to remind ours, we are protecting our home. Our people remember it very well, muttered the second secretary of the regional committee, without taking his eyes off the notebook. Repetition is the mother of learning. Godunov stopped him and looked at Odintsov. So what do we have, you say, with the pilots? All the main things were said, now it was time for everyone at their post to get to work. The meeting participants began to disperse. Not at home, but, as Godunov mentally put it in his customary manner, according to departments. Only Belyaev, Obolensky and Odintsov remained. Moreover, Ignatov, the second secretary of the regional committee, continued to rustle busily with a sharpened pencil along the pages of the notebook. The head of the distance lingered on the threshold. "Comrade Senior Major, I would like to exchange a word or two with you," he said, narrowing his eyes slyly, with the air of a professional conspirator. "Listen," Godunov tensed, although, apparently, the news was not bad. "I didn't publicly disclose that, as it was sung in old romances, not to arouse the fatal passions, but simply speaking, not to excite the people." He hesitated, feigning embarrassment. "I have another train." "Yes, not anyhow, but Fedushka. FD, that is. And there is a thought on his account. A comrade Senior Major, in the 19th year went as a machinist on the Kommunar armored train. So I thought a little, while we were talking here, why not? Well, go ahead, Comrade Senior Major of the 3rd rank, remember what you know about armored trains. Let's, Savely Artemyevich, the railroad worker prompted sagaciously. Come on, Savely Artemyevich, let's discuss this with our comrades, and we will decide. We decided, to adapt Felix for evacuation. They figured, for 3 flights then you can manage. Even Artemich, stubborn and sighing, you see, he had already drawn a picture of a heroic past and an even more heroic future, it admitted, the cuckoos, back and forth, to Tula and back, Coal Ore. Here Belyaev rather shamelessly interrupted him, and he sent him out. Time was also in short supply. The party secretary frowned at Godunov as he approached and went back to work. What, Comrade Ignatov, are you scribbling abstracts for the report? Godunov smiled conciliatorily. Not until the reports now. Reports, Senior Major, they will write on us ourselves if we piss off the city. Believe me, they will spare neither ink nor paper, there will be well-wishers. I have already studied our system on my own skin. After all, from the end of the civil and the organs. Checklist, then? Although it is dreary now, and there is no time for heart-to-heart conversations, it is necessary to find a common language with the party leadership of the city. And why did you switch to party work? Wherever they sent me, I served there. Yes, and it became uncomfortable in our headquarters for old cadres. You yourself, I wonder, are not a Moscow nominee. I don't remember you. So I don't remember you. Nikolai. Do not dump, we are now swinging the same swing. Alexander. Well, that's good. Where did you serve before the war? On Murman, Godunov answered cautiously. Far from our edges, fact. And how is it? What kind of people in the office crept up? Yes, like everywhere else. A well-known service, Nikolai. As previously said, sovereign. Ignatov suddenly got up from his seat. No, He didn't get up, he erected, and immediately became like a 2-meter monument wrapped in a protective jacket. Watch your language, Senior Major, think that you are talking. The old time is over and will never return. And think another time ahead of blurting out. Whom did you compare with kings? Is he hinting at the propaganda of monarchism? He's stuck. We've moored, we're mooring. Only now there aren't enough explanations, clarifications. They gave you valuable advice, comrade fellow, of course, valuable, watch your tongue, you'll sleep, ahead of time. The local people are still of that hardening, revolutionary. For the propaganda of monarchism, they can even, according to the laws of wartime, not look at the rank. All the more, fake. And before the November speech of Stalin, let the courageous image of our great ancestors inspire you, you still need to live. There was nothing to lose. But the idea of unity of command must be given here and now, otherwise you really get screwed without having time to do anything. Leave it. Godunov said sharply. Convictions, party conscience and vigilance, all this is very correct and very necessary, especially in wartime, but they do not cancel subordination. Not at all, he paused, as if putting an end to it, and lowered his tone. Come on, Nikolai, we will agree once and for all, you have chosen the wrong time for agitation. And there is no need to agitate me for the Soviet power, I was firmly agitated even in that war. Yes, and the kings, if you think about it, they were different, not all of them were like Nikolashka. Look, about Peter the Great, Comrade Stalin himself ordered a movie to be made, and about Alexander Nevsky, who smashed the Germans, too. And Stalin, he knows better than you and me what is good for the Soviet people, and what is vice versa. And he himself did so much for the state that no king could do. Phew, it seems, I picked the right words, the party secretary looked respectfully. Look, what a tongue. On the word and do not catch. Ignatov ruffled his dark blonde forelock and again took his place at the table. We had a Cossack like you in Tashenka, you could have shrugged it off. Look, and the secretary, it turns out, from the Cossacks? How did he manage to rise to such a position? Again, it turns out, newfangled journalists and historians are lying, and after them the People's Rumor thoughtlessly repeats that before the war there were only persecutions of the Cossacks, along, across and all the time? Apparently, it is rightly said, do not believe every rumor. Before you came to the authorities, who were you? Navy. He served on a submarine. That's how it is. And what seas did you swim in, the Black Sea or the Baltic Sea? Who swam, but I walked. I didn't have a chance to visit the Black Sea. It didn't work out, you know. I heard about yours. In 1920, we had a sailor from Helsingfors, Vaska. How could he? Oh. Slesaryev, for sure. So he told how the submarines were taken away from the White Finns. Do you know this? No, I don't remember anything. There are a lot of people in the fleet. And yet, Nikolai, what are you writing? Yes, the commissioner on the sly. Here is an appeal to the fighters and residents of the city scribbled, a leaflet, the enemy is at the threshold. Now I'm trying to make a text for the Germans, well, to try to transmit it on the radio. You, for an hour, do not know on what wave their walkie-talkies are caught? I do not know. But I suppose the signalman will figure it out. Let me see. Godunov, bringing Ignatov's notebook close to the lamp, ran his eyes over the lines. German soldiers, Hitler requires blind obedience from you, since only blindness can lead to catastrophic death. You are blinded by the chatter of the party bosses of the NSDAP, hiding from the front in the deep rear, but even before death you are given schnapps before the attack. Germany received almost 1 million dead and maimed in the first days of the invasion of Russia. If they did not obey the Hitler-Göring-Goebbels clique that blindly sold the ideals of National Socialism, they would still be alive. If you are not blind, then before the war you saw more than once that the Russians are not your enemies, but your friends. Why are you looking for your graves here? Your home, your family is waiting for you. You must return home alive and not crippled. There is only one way out of the catastrophe that Hitler is preparing for you, return to your families. Aha, what you need. But something is missing. Listen, Nikolai, where, you say, will you broadcast? From Radiodom, where else? Army stations in the city Mar. It's good for the whole garrison if decent ones are left from the heels. Yes, and they are increasingly telegraphing Morse code. Yeah. But if poetry is also put at the service of this prose of life, what do you think? Nemtura is sentimental. And the song word is stronger in the brain, you know. I know. With a good song, it's easier to fight, and help on a campaign, and fun at a halt. But what do you propose, to compose songs for the hands, or what? So Goebbels and his henchmen, I suppose, even without us composed so many marches that just march until you wipe your legs up to your ass. However, I have several records of Ernst Busch in my committee, still left from my predecessors. They composed it, yes, Godunov drawled thoughtfully. Well, the fascist repertoire is well known, and we, again, will remind them of the Kinder, and the Mutter, and the Frau in Fatherland, who, apart from the funeral from under the Ural, will have nothing to expect. Here, if only a simple leaflet could be properly translated, where can one take poetry and songs? Ignatov was indignant, although it was clear from everything that the very idea of a propaganda song inspired him. The gods don't burn pots, Nikolai. Once upon a time, I knew the language of Tellman and Engels quite well. I will try to turn the folklore around. Godunov, of course, did not specify that he had learned German for many years to come, in the School Club of International Friendship, translating letters from peers from the GDR, and in a sailor he mastered as a second foreign language. Future naval officers made the main emphasis on English, international maritime. And he called folklore the song of anti-fascists from the Free Germany Committee, learned for the gala evening dedicated to the anniversary of the Stalingrad victory. It roars through the world. Her imperious cries. In their footsteps is fire and death. Slavery follows her hordes. And gallows, annihilation and death. With deceit and deceit. With assassination and blood. They dishonored Germany before the whole world. They robbed and plundered their belongings. And chased millions into the field. He then also made the transcription. And so he performed, first the German, and then the Russian version, slightly correcting the melody in order to fit the lines that sounded in a new way into it. German was delighted. But the corrosive Russian, although she rewarded the work with several fives, did not fail to notice, the transcription should be done in accordance with the rhythm and size of the original. She also found fault with rhymes. Sanka then thought exactly that, he found fault. But Nadia Zubkova stopped being indignant that she was transplanted from her friend Ladochka to this hooligan Sanka, and even copied the words of the song into her notebook. It was a success. If only you knew then, Sonia Godunov, what success you have ahead of you. Look, Nikolai, what happened? And on the back, in Russian. Ignatov quickly glanced at the German text, turned the page, and began to read in an undertone in a marching recitative. The planet hears their wolf howl. Jawohl, mein Führer, jawohl, jawohl. Hell burns behind them. The eyes of the dead look after them. They serve meanness, deceit and fear. In deeds, cruelty and lies, in words, cooled ashes behind them. And the whole globe is covered with blood. He glanced expressively at Godunov, is strong, they say, and continued, raising his voice. German soldier, don't lie to yourself. Otherwise, you will fall by the Oka River. A criminal rules your country. Don't shed blood and sweat for him. The killer shouts to you, forward. But there is the fatherland and your people. And you are not an enemy to the workers, but a brother. Fight for freedom, soldier. Again he raised his head, looked with a squint. Where did you come from, such a poet? Godunov shrugged. Yes, I'm a poet. Yes, amateur. Maybe there is something else that fits? No? Well, okay. Let's get by with what we have. You look like it's said, huh? Peoples of the world, rally your forces. Break the hordes that sow evil, and to rather break the hand. The sun of freedom has risen for you. Can you find someone to perform? If it's necessary, then I'll find it, assured the party secretary, folding the papers into a cardboard folder. Well, good luck to you, comrade senior major. The horse will not give out, and the enemy will not eat, see you. Godunov turned off the lamp, lay down again. Why did he then write in an arrangement about the Oka? The original was the Volga. Local patriotism? Or was it easier to find a rhyme? Or maybe he had a premonition then, didn't break through to consciousness, but whispered something to the subconscious? 3 hours of sleep is good luck, which is a sin not to take advantage of. But come on, there are a lot of thoughts, but no sleep in one eye. Everything is thinking about those who have already been awakened by the messengers. Not about human resources, about people who are already involved in what is happening and who are yet to be involved. Fates change. And there is no way to know how the alternative created not by anyone, but by you, Sonia Godunov, will affect one fate. Brigvoenvrak, what is his last name? Smirnov? Yes, that's right. Why didn't you realize right away? And what if there are almost more Smirnovs in Rus than Ivanovs Petrovs? Correlate the surname with the position, and everything is obvious. There is nowhere more obvious. I remembered the book that stood among the other favorites on the shelf above the desk. On the outside of the worn paper cover was written, M. Martinov, A. Eventov. Underground Hospital. On the inside, in calligraphic handwriting, it was written, to Alexander from Nadezhda on the day of February 23rd. Nadia Nadezhda Nadyuka, a roommate and the first love of 14-year-old Sanka. She loved his poems and laughed openly at his enthusiasm for local history. But she gave me the book anyway. One of the heroes of this documentary story was Veniamin Alexandrovich Smirnov, the chief physician of the Russian hospital, which saved hundreds of people, prisoners of war and townspeople. The same Brigvoenvrak who today so desperately grabbed the opportunity to evacuate the wounded. Fates change. And you, fortunately, still see how.